On the wedding morning, I opened the door and saw my wife frozen before the mirror, her newly grown silver hair cut away while my future daughter-in-law laughed on camera, calling it a prank. I stayed silent until the consequences came, and she began to tremble. My name is Corbin, and I'm 70 years old. I survived a career as an architectural engineer in Chicago, building a life of quiet stability. I escaped poverty and forged success, but the cruelest blow came from inside my own family. Last Saturday, I pushed open the heavy oak door of the bridal suite at the country club. I expected to find my wife Nadine adjusting her dress for our son's wedding. Instead, a horrifying scene paralyzed my lungs. Nadine sat completely frozen in a velvet vanity chair. Harper, my future daughter-in-law, stood directly behind her, wielding buzzing electric clippers. Nadine's beautiful silver hair fell in massive clumps to the polished marble floor. That hair was a triumph. Nadine had just completed a brutal year of chemotherapy for breast cancer, and those silver strands represented her survival. Harper simply stared into a glowing phone ring light mounted on a tripod. She laughed a sharp, soulless laugh and declared to her live audience that this was the ultimate wedding day prank. She claimed she was giving her mother-in-law a fresh makeover. Nadine did not fight back or yell. She just stared at her own reflection and cried in utter silence. Tears streamed down her cheeks, soaking the collar of her silk gown. I stood at the threshold, watching 40 years of my protective love shatter in an instant. The buzzing of the clippers echoed like a siren inside my ringing ears. Please leave a quick comment below where you are watching this video from. My son Jared leaned casually against the wooden doorframe of the suite. He held a crystal flute of expensive champagne in his right hand. He took a slow sip and rolled his eyes at his mother. He told her to stop ruining the joyful wedding vibe and learn to take a simple internet joke. His voice lacked any trace of empathy. He spoke to the woman who gave him life as if she were an annoying stranger complaining about a spilled drink. I looked at Jared and felt my chest tighten with a suffocating wave of profound regret. Memories flooded my mind instantly. I remembered working 80 brutal hours every single week on dangerous construction sites. I endured the freezing, unforgiving Chicago winters for decades just to pay his exorbitant Ivy League tuition. I sacrificed my own comfort and health, constantly swearing my son would grow up with integrity, honor, and deep respect for his family. I bought him a debt-free future so he would never have to struggle like I did. I believed I was building a strong, upstanding man. That beautiful illusion shattered permanently right there in the hallway. He was not a respectable finance broker. He was a selfish, arrogant enabler who valued digital popularity over his mother's basic human dignity. He watched his bride humiliate a cancer survivor and simply drank his champagne. He even chuckled when Harper zoomed the camera in on Nadine's tear-stained face. He encouraged the cruelty because it generated online engagement. The boy I had raised was completely dead to me right then and there. A cold, absolute clarity washed over my mind. The time for fatherly patience had officially expired. My son had chosen his side, and he had chosen very poorly. I took a deep breath to steady my nerves. I did not scream or raise my voice. I did not step forward to shatter the recording phone into 100 useless pieces. Anger would only give them the dramatic reaction they desperately wanted for their pathetic internet audience. Instead, I moved forward with slow, calculated precision. I walked directly past my son without acknowledging his existence. I stepped right in front of the camera lens, deliberately ruining their precious shot. I reached up and carefully unpinned the expensive silk boutonniere from my tailored suit lapel. With absolute calm, I dropped the delicate flower directly into Harper's half-empty champagne glass. The liquid splashed over the rim and stained her pristine white dress. She gasped in shock, but I never even looked at her face. I turned my full attention to my devastated wife. I gently unbuttoned my suit jacket and draped the warm fabric over Nadine's trembling shoulders to cover her stained collar. I reached down and took her shaking hand in mine. Her fingers were ice-cold, gripping mine as if I were her only lifeline in a room full of monsters. I lifted her from the velvet chair with the utmost care and respect. I guided her toward the heavy wooden door. Jared suddenly realized the gravity of my silence. Panic leaked into his voice as he stepped forward, nervously demanding that we stay for the family photos. He pleaded that leaving would cause a massive scene. I did not give him a single word of response. I did not offer a backward glance. I simply opened the door and escorted my wife out of the bridal suite, leaving those two greedy children to drown in the suffocating silence we left behind. We walked away together to begin the quiet process of their absolute and total financial ruin. I led Nadine carefully down the grand staircase and out into the bright sunlight of the valet parking lot. I tipped the attendant and helped my wife into the passenger seat of our sedan. She stared out the window, her hands gripping her ruined dress in silent agony. I climbed into the driver's seat, gripped the steering wheel, and closed my eyes for a brief moment to contain the fury boiling in my veins. I pressed the ignition button and the engine roared to life. At that exact second, my mobile phone vibrated violently inside my chest pocket. I pulled it out, expecting to see another desperate, whining message from Jared begging me to return and save his precious public image. Instead, an automated alert from my primary banking application glared back at me from the bright screen. A massive withdrawal of exactly $10,000 had just been successfully processed and cleared. My eyes narrowed as I read the terrifying details. The money had been drained directly from my secure emergency medical savings account, the exact account I had meticulously built to pay for Nadine's expensive breast cancer treatments and ongoing recovery medications. The transaction reference line boldly displayed the recipient name. It read, Harper Media LLC Viral Campaign Funding. My blood turned to absolute ice. This sick wedding day stunt was never just a cruel prank for internet attention. It was a calculated, monetized theft designed to steal my hard-earned savings under the disguise of a digital joke. My own son had deliberately granted his new wife access to my private financial records. They robbed a cancer survivor to fund their hollow influencer lifestyle. The war had officially started right then, and I fully intended to destroy them both without any mercy in my very soul starting right now. The tense drive home suffocated both of us inside the quiet cabin of the sedan. Nadine touched her bare scalp with trembling fingers, weeping quietly against the cool glass of the passenger window. Every silent tear she shed fueled a cold fire burning deep inside my chest. I gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my mind actively shifting gears. I was no longer the grieving father mourning the loss of a respectful son. I was rapidly reverting to the ruthless businessman who had built a massive logistics empire from a single rusty delivery truck. My mobile phone illuminated the cup holder, vibrating relentlessly with incoming calls. Jared was panicking. The screen flashed his name 40 consecutive times during the drive. He left several voicemails, his voice oscillating between angry demands and pathetic apologies. I ignored every single one of them. Responding to an entitled child only validates their tantrum. I needed absolute silence to formulate a plan of total destruction. I looked over at my beautiful wife, remembering how she stood by me when we had nothing but an eviction notice and a dream. She did not deserve this vicious humiliation. Jared thought he held the upper hand because he believed I was just a retired old man living on a fixed pension. He had severely underestimated the man who raised him. I drove through our modest neighborhood, my focus sharpening with every passing block. I refused to let blind, paternal affection cloud my judgment anymore. The son I loved vanished the moment he handed his bride those clippers. The man calling my phone was merely a thief requiring immediate consequences. I parked the car securely in our narrow concrete driveway, turned off the engine completely, and prepared to dissect their entire digital charade very thoroughly. Arriving at our modest suburban home, I guided Nadine inside with the utmost care, sheltering her from the harsh afternoon sun. I led her to our bedroom, pulling back the heavy quilted blanket so she could rest. I went to the kitchen, boiled some water, and brewed a strong cup of chamomile tea. I brought the warm porcelain mug to her bedside, planting a soft kiss on her wet, tearful cheek. She did not speak, but her tired eyes conveyed a profound gratitude that broke my heart. I closed the bedroom door quietly, ensuring she had complete privacy to process the trauma. I retreated to my private study down the hall, a room filled with blueprints and ledgers from my past corporate life. I sat in my leather chair, opened my laptop, and connected to the secure internet network. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I searched for Harper's public social media platforms. I found her main profile instantly. The vile video was already live, pinned to the top of her colorful feed. The thumbnail featured an exaggerated image of Nadine crying, while Harper made a shocked face at the camera. I clicked the play button, forcing myself to watch the absolute disrespect unfold again in high definition. The view count sat at 2 million and was rapidly climbing higher every single second. Thousands of comments praised Harper for being so funny and brave, completely ignoring the visible pain etched across my wife's face. The digital audience consumed our private tragedy as cheap entertainment. Harper was monetizing my family's suffering with ruthless efficiency, and Jared was enabling every second of it. I studied the screen closely, noting the various brand sponsorships tagged in the video description. My analytical mind began mapping out the infrastructure of their fragile online empire. I scrolled past the endless stream of superficial comments and focused on the caption beneath the video. Harper had written a long, dramatic paragraph detailing the immense emotional toll the wedding planning had taken on her fragile mental health. She masterfully played the victim card, completely manipulating the narrative to generate intense public sympathy. The truth was far more sinister. Nadine had just finished a grueling, agonizing year of intensive breast cancer chemotherapy exactly 6 months ago. She fought a terrifying battle against death and miraculously survived. Her newly grown silver hair was her proud crown of survival, a physical testament to her incredible strength. Harper knew this deeply personal fact, yet she still chose to violate my wife's bodily autonomy for online clout. As I continued reading the lengthy description, my eyes locked onto a blue hyperlink carefully embedded at the very bottom of the text block. Harper had officially launched an aggressive crowdfunding campaign directly tied to the viral prank. The bold title of the fraudulent donation page read, "Supporting my mother-in-law health journey." The sheer audacity of the scheme left me momentarily paralyzed. She was actively using Nadine's cancer recovery as a fake charity hook to solicit money from gullible strangers across the globe. She painted herself as a devoted, exhausted caretaker, desperately needing financial assistance to manage my wife's fictitious medical bills. It was a perfectly designed emotional trap. The video provided the shocking visual hook while the emotional caption reeled the audience right into the donation portal. I realized then that my son had not just married a vapid social media influencer. He had partnered with a highly calculated con artist. I clicked the crowdfunding link, ready to expose the deep financial rot festering beneath their highly polished digital facade here absolutely today. The campaign webpage loaded rapidly on my bright laptop monitor, revealing a staggering live donation ticker. Gullible strangers were blindly donating thousands of hard-earned dollars by the absolute minute. The total sum had already effortlessly surpassed $50,000 and showed absolutely zero signs of stopping anytime soon. I analyzed the site interface, meticulously employing the exact same sharp scrutiny I once used to dissect massive corporate freight contracts. I bypassed the flashy emotional graphics and scrolled directly to the bottom registry section to find the public funding data. My expert eyes quickly zeroed in on the registered payout routing number designated to receive the final bulk transfer. I memorized the digits instantly. The money was not being routed to a local hospital, charity, or any legitimate medical foundation. It belonged entirely to a private offshore banking account registered exclusively under the name of Jared. My own son was utilizing his new bride's massive digital audience to execute a highly lucrative international wire fraud operation right under my nose. He had weaponized his mother's fragile health condition to securely line his own greedy pockets without doing a single day of honest labor. The sheer volume of the deception cemented my resolve completely. I picked up my mobile phone from the wooden desk and dialed the private direct line of Arthur Harrington, my fiercely loyal corporate attorney. Arthur answered immediately on the second ring, his tone sharp and professional as always. I did not waste time with pleasantries or basic emotional complaints about the ruined wedding day. I gave him a single, clear, devastating instruction. I told him to trace every single penny of my son's stolen money immediately. The silent adjustment of our toxic family hierarchy had officially begun right here in my very own private office right now. The morning sun had barely crested the suburban horizon when heavy, violent fists began pounding against my solid oak front door. The aggressive blows rattled the brass hinges and echoed through the quiet hallway. I secured my robe and opened the door to find Jared standing on my porch. He still wore his wrinkled wedding tuxedo from the night before, his silk bow tie hanging loosely around his unbuttoned collar. The stale stench of expensive bourbon and sweet wedding cake clung to his clothes. He reeked of intense entitlement and a bitter hangover. Without waiting for a polite invitation, my son shoved past me and barged directly into the foyer. He paced the hardwood floor like a caged animal, his face twisted in absolute fury. He immediately demanded to know why I had deliberately humiliated him and his new bride in front of their elite guests. He screamed that my silent departure from the bridal suite had completely ruined the carefully orchestrated wedding photographs. According to him, my protective actions were a selfish tantrum that destroyed the perfect aesthetic of his extravagant reception. He accused me of abandoning my basic duties as a father just to make a dramatic, unnecessary point. I stood there quietly watching the boy I had raised throw a childish fit inside the home I had built. He did not ask how his mother was feeling today. He did not express a single ounce of remorse for the profound trauma his wife had inflicted upon a highly vulnerable cancer survivor. His entire existence revolved solely around the superficial image he projected to anonymous internet strangers. The absolute lack of empathy in his loud voice firmly cemented the cold realization I had reached the previous afternoon. He was entirely consumed by his arrogance and deep personal greed. Jared abruptly stopped pacing and aggressively pointed his finger toward the closed door of the master bedroom. He loudly demanded that Nadine come out immediately to record a formal reconciliation video for his wife's channel. He shamelessly explained that major corporate brands were actively threatening to pull lucrative sponsorships from Harper's social media accounts. The online commenters had sharply noticed Nadine's genuine heartbroken tears in the original video upload. The digital public was rapidly turning against his bride, and the financial backlash was severely damaging their incoming revenue streams. Jared possessed the unbelievable audacity to order me to fix the massive public relations nightmare they had exclusively created. He insisted that his mother needed to publicly smile, apologize for overreacting, and officially declare the malicious haircut was just a harmless, pre-planned family joke. He valued his incoming brand deals vastly more than his mother's shattered dignity. I listened to his pathetic, desperate demands with an unbreakable, icy calmness settling deep inside my chest. He spoke rapidly, listing off the specific monetary amounts they were currently losing from canceled promotional contracts. He genuinely believed that explaining the steep financial losses would compel me to force my recovering wife to submit to further public humiliation. His priorities were sickeningly warped. He viewed Nadine not as a human being recovering from a life-threatening illness, but solely as a malfunctioning prop that was currently obstructing his upward social trajectory. He expected me to prioritize his shiny artificial internet persona over the profound emotional safety of the woman I loved. I watched his mouth move, fully recognizing that the son standing before me was a complete moral failure. The boy had traded his own soul for digital clout and shallow, fleeting internet fame. I completely refused to let his toxic demands pollute my home today. I stepped forward and physically blocked the hallway, standing firmly between my aggressive son and the closed bedroom door. I spoke with a chilling, surgical precision, informing Jared that neither I nor his vulnerable mother would ever participate in his pathetic digital circus. I watched his face contort with entitled frustration as I methodically dismantled his foolish demands. I reminded him exactly where he was standing. I told him that every single brick and wooden floorboard in this modest house was bought and paid for with my honest, grueling sweat. I built my fortune spending decades managing brutal logistics contracts and designing complex architectural structures in the harshest city environments imaginable. I did not earn my livelihood by begging anonymous strangers for validation through a glowing phone screen. I firmly pointed out the window toward the expensive, flashy sports car parked carelessly in my driveway. I reminded my son that his luxury vehicle was nothing but a heavily leased illusion, a hollow status symbol financed entirely by the secondary bank accounts I had graciously provided for him. His entire lifestyle was a flimsy house of cards built on my foundational wealth. I ordered Jared to leave my property immediately and never raise his voice in my home again. He stared at me, his eyes widening with genuine shock as my unyielding tone finally pierced through his alcohol-soaked arrogance. For the very first time in his sheltered, privileged life, I was denying him the protective safety net he had always taken for granted, without any question. I stood there like an immovable stone wall, refusing to yield a single inch. I demanded his immediate departure, ensuring he clearly understood that my paternal patience had permanently expired today. My private house was no longer his personal playground to openly disrespect ever again. Jared completely lost his temper, his face turning an ugly shade of dark crimson. He let out a condescending sneer, completely dropping any remaining pretense of familial respect. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his ruined tuxedo jacket and pulled out a sharply folded legal document. He aggressively shoved the thick paper against my chest, forcing me to take it. He coldly informed me that he had officially filed a preliminary petition for medical conservatorship early that morning. His cruel eyes locked onto mine as he explained the horrific details of his scheme. The fabricated legal filing maliciously claimed that both my wife and I were currently suffering from severe, rapidly advancing cognitive decline. He had maliciously weaponized Nadine's physical exhaustion from her cancer treatments to falsely portray us as mentally incompetent and incapable of managing our own affairs. Jared blatantly threatened to have us forcibly removed from our comfortable home and permanently placed in a miserable state-run nursing facility if we boldly refused to cooperate with his wife's internet channel. He genuinely believed this fraudulent piece of paper would successfully terrify me into absolute submission. He expected me to instantly bow down, surrender my dignity, and hand over complete control of my hidden wealth just to keep our personal freedom intact. He smiled a wicked, triumphant smile, absolutely convinced he held the ultimate winning hand in this twisted game of chess. He arrogantly turned around and marched out the front door, slamming it loudly behind him to punctuate his vile threat. I stood perfectly still in the quiet hallway, holding the forged legal document in my calloused hands. The ultimate unbreakable line had just been crossed. I immediately picked up my phone and called my lawyer, ready to absolutely decimate his entire life starting right now today. Jared peeled out of my driveway, the tires of his leased sports car screeching against the asphalt as he sped away. The moment his vehicle disappeared around the corner, I grabbed my coat and secured the front door. I drove straight into the heart of downtown Chicago to meet my attorney. Arthur Harrington waited for me inside his expansive corner office overlooking the city skyline. I handed him the crumpled legal document Jared had shoved against my chest. Arthur smoothed the thick paper out and laid it flat across his polished mahogany conference table. We scrutinized the preliminary petition for medical conservatorship line by line. The document was a masterpiece of fabricated legal jargon designed to completely strip away my civil rights. It alleged that both Nadine and I suffered from severe dementia, rendering us completely incapable of managing our own finances. Arthur pointed a gold pen at the bottom of the second page. A bold, sweeping signature certified the fraudulent medical claims. The name printed beneath the ink belonged to a physician I had never met or even heard of in my entire life. I stared at the forged medical endorsement, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. Jared had not simply downloaded a generic legal template from the internet. He had actively conspired with a licensed medical professional to create a legally binding trap. Arthur adjusted his glasses, his expression darkening as he recognized the severity of the situation. This was no longer just an arrogant temper tantrum from an entitled son. It was a highly coordinated criminal attempt to hijack my entire estate. My own flesh and blood had carefully laid the groundwork to imprison his parents just to steal our hidden money. I looked directly at Arthur and demanded the complete financial truth immediately. Arthur opened a thick manila folder and extracted a stack of confidential bank statements. He spread the printed spreadsheets across the table, creating a devastating timeline of financial betrayal. He looked me squarely in the eye and delivered the crushing results of his rapid investigation. The $10,000 withdrawal that triggered my phone alert was merely a tiny fraction of the massive total theft. Jared had not just committed a single crime of opportunity during his wedding weekend. He had been systematically robbing his own family for a very long time. Arthur traced his pen along a column of highlighted transactions dating back 24 months. Jared had been quietly siphoning significant amounts of cash from my secondary investment accounts. He carefully kept the withdrawals just under the automatic fraud detection limits. He funneled every stolen dollar directly into Harper's expanding social media enterprise. The designer clothes she flaunted online, the extravagant vacation she vlogged about, and the expensive camera equipment she used to humiliate my wife were all secretly financed by my hard-earned money. Jared had weaponized my vast resources to artificially inflate his bride's hollow influencer lifestyle. I read through the itemized ledger, feeling a profound sickness settle deep into my stomach. My son had transformed my entire life savings into a personal slush fund to securely buy fake internet popularity. He deliberately targeted the accounts I rarely checked, assuming my old age made me careless and ignorant. He believed he was outsmarting a foolish old man who did not understand modern banking. He was terribly wrong. I possessed the sharpest analytical mind in my entire corporate firm before I retired. I analyzed the raw spreadsheets, silently calculating the exact sum of his betrayal. The The stolen amount was staggering, but his sheer audacity was absolutely unforgivable. Arthur leaned across the heavy oak conference table and pointed to a specific sequence of numbers identifying the unauthorized transfers on the page. He carefully explained the precise technical exploit Jared had utilized to bypass the bank's strict internal security protocols. 10 years ago, when Jared was struggling through his difficult final semesters at his expensive university, I had established a specific linked account exclusively for his essential educational expenses. I gave him a unique digital access code so he could pay his remaining tuition directly without asking me for permission every single time. It was a gesture of immense paternal trust designed to foster his financial independence. I never revoked that specific clearance code after his graduation ceremony concluded. Jared maliciously retained that obsolete authorization pass and actively manipulated the outdated digital linkage to quietly infiltrate my broader investment portfolio. My own enduring love and generous support had become the exact instrument he used to financially execute me. I sat completely still, absorbing the sheer venom of his calculated actions. I provided him with the necessary tools to build a highly successful life, and he shamelessly used them to dig my financial grave. Arthur closed the folder, watching my face with deep professional concern. He asked me how aggressively I wanted to respond to this blatant criminal behavior today. I did not need a single moment to consider my answer. The agonizing sting of betrayal was rapidly crystallizing into an unbreakable wall of cold determination. The emotional bond tying me to my only child completely severed right then and there forever. He had officially declared a devastating war against his vulnerable mother and his exhausted father. I would not simply defend my personal territory. I would completely eradicate his entire artificial kingdom and leave him with absolutely nothing tomorrow. I instructed Arthur to enact an immediate and total asset freeze across every single joint account under my name. I authorized him to lock down my entire financial portfolio, completely severing Jared's unauthorized access to my capital. Arthur nodded efficiently, his fingers typing rapidly across his secure terminal keyboard to execute my absolute command. He communicated directly with my senior lead bank managers, permanently blocking all routing numbers and severely restricting any external electronic transfers. Just as Arthur hit the final confirmation key to lock the assets, my smartphone buzzed violently inside my pocket. I pulled the device out and stared at an urgent notification generated by my premium credit monitoring service. A massive high-risk financial transaction was currently pending final approval on my heavily protected primary savings account. I opened the detailed alert and read the shocking parameters of the transaction. Jared was actively attempting to close a multi-million-dollar purchase agreement on a luxury beach condo in sunny Malibu. He was currently sitting in a broker's office, shamelessly attempting to utilize my primary retirement savings account as the foundational collateral for his exorbitant mortgage. He desperately needed a colossal influx of cash to secure his brand new waterfront property and fund Harper's newest aesthetic background. He completely believed his fraudulent medical conservatorship petition would soon grant him full legal control over my assets, so he was blindly spending my money before the ink on his fake document even dried. A dark, hollow chuckle escaped my lips as I comprehended the absolutely breathtaking scale of his reckless arrogance. I stared at the blinking red notification on my screen, knowing exactly what was going to happen next. I instructed Arthur to watch the banking terminal closely because my greedy son was about to experience a truly spectacular financial collision immediately. The bright mid-morning sun bathed the sleek glass walls of the luxury Malibu real estate office in warm golden light. Jared sat arrogantly across the polished marble desk from the senior property broker. He wore a tailored Italian suit, completely convinced he had outsmarted me and secured his financial independence through my stolen wealth. Harper perched right beside him, holding her expensive smartphone high in the air. She was actively live-streaming the grand house reveal to her millions of followers, boasting loudly about their brand new multi-million-dollar oceanfront property. She panned the camera around the lavish office, ensuring her captive audience saw the prestigious agency logo etched deeply into the frosted glass doors. The broker placed the final closing documents between them, detailing a massive down payment required to secure the immediate transfer of the deed. Jared smiled, a smug, highly victorious smile. He reached into his designer leather wallet and extracted the solid metal premium debit card directly linked to the very account he had fraudulently hijacked from me. He placed the heavy card on the desk with a loud theatrical clack, ensuring the microphone on Harper's phone picked up the distinct sound of his supposed immense wealth. He casually instructed the broker to charge the entire six-figure closing cost immediately. Harper leaned into the frame, blowing a kiss to her digital fans and declaring that this was the exciting start of their beautiful new chapter. They were celebrating a stolen victory right in front of a live global audience. They basked in the shallow glory of their artificial success, completely unaware that the financial ground beneath their feet had already vanished. The broker picked up the metal card with a polite, practiced smile and inserted it into the digital payment terminal to finalize the massive transaction today. The digital payment terminal emitted a sharp, unpleasant beeping sound that directly pierced the quiet elegance of the office. The bright screen flashed a bold red error message indicating the massive transaction was absolutely denied. The broker frowned slightly politely, informing Jared that the primary card had just been declined by the issuing bank. Jared let out a loud, nervous chuckle, instantly attempting to save face in front of his wife's live audience. He confidently assured the broker and the viewing fans that it was merely a routine fraud alert triggered by the unusually large purchase amount. He smoothly pulled a second platinum credit card from his wallet, boasting that wealthy men always carry solid backups for these minor inconveniences. The broker swiped the second card through the machine. The exact same harsh rejection beep quickly echoed through the room. Jared's arrogant smile faltered, replaced by a sudden flash of genuine panic. His hands began to tremble as he aggressively shoved a third card across the marble desk, demanding the broker run the numbers again. The result remained firmly identical. Every single account tied to his name displayed a locked status or an absolute zero balance. The financial fortress he thought he controlled had been systematically dismantled and sealed shut by my legal team. The undeniable reality of his sudden poverty crashed heavily down upon him. Harper stared at the glaring red screen on the payment terminal, her perfectly manicured fingers shaking violently. She immediately reached forward and abruptly terminated her live broadcast, instantly cutting off the feed to her millions of confused followers. The vibrant color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and deeply pale. The luxurious illusion they had meticulously crafted for the internet evaporated into thin air, leaving them completely exposed as penniless frauds. Jared snatched his useless plastic cards from the desk and stumbled out of the broker's pristine office, his chest heaving with uncontrolled anxiety. He stepped onto the busy sunlit sidewalk and aggressively punched my private number into his smartphone. He paced furiously back and forth, desperate to regain access to the stolen wealth that funded his entire existence. Back at my quiet suburban home, I stood in my sunny backyard holding a green plastic watering can. I was peacefully tending to Nadine's blooming rose bushes, finding a calm rhythm in the simple household chore. The cool water nourished the dry soil, just as my calculated actions were actively starving my enemies. My phone began vibrating inside my trousers. I checked the screen, saw Jared's name flashing urgently, and answered the call with a perfectly steady hand. I did not say a single polite hello. I simply listened to the frantic sound of his ragged breathing. Jared immediately launched into a hysterical tirade, screaming loudly into the receiver. He demanded to know exactly why the bank was rejecting every single transaction and why his access codes were suddenly invalid. He completely dropped the arrogant, entitled facade he had worn just a few hours earlier on my front porch. He sounded like a terrified child who had just realized the protective safety net was permanently gone. I let him yell until his voice cracked from sheer panic. I adjusted the flow of the watering can, ensuring the delicate petals received enough moisture. I held the phone close to my mouth and spoke with a cold, devastating clarity that sliced right through his pathetic hysteria. I calmly stated that cowardly thieves do not get to enjoy unlimited credit lines on my dime. I informed him the free financial ride was officially over forever. Jared exploded with violent rage right there on the busy public sidewalk. He shrieked unhinged threats directly into the phone, his voice echoing with desperate venom. He promised to weaponize the legal system against me with absolute brutality. He loudly swore that he would forcefully finalize the fraudulent medical conservatorship petition first thing tomorrow morning and legally strip away every single asset I owned. He threatened to have armed officers drag Nadine and me out of our own comfortable home and throw us into a bleak state facility forever. He vowed to seize control of my entire wealth, by force convinced his forged document was an absolutely invincible weapon. I listened to his pathetic tantrum without a single ounce of fear. I did not waste my breath engaging in a pointless screaming match with a cornered rat. I simply pressed the red button on my smartphone and hung up, completely cutting off his frantic threats in mid-sentence. The garden was beautifully quiet once again. I set the green watering can down on the neatly trimmed grass and walked back inside the house. As I wiped the dirt from my hands, my phone chimed softly with a highly classified text message from Arthur Harrington. The message contained a terrifying yet incredibly useful background update regarding the medical document Jared had aggressively shoved at me. Arthur's elite private investigators had already uncovered the true identity of the mysterious physician who boldly signed the fake cognitive decline report. The corrupt doctor did not operate a legitimate psychiatric practice anywhere in this city. The fraudulent signature belonged entirely to Harper's older cousin, a disgraced medical professional desperately searching for quick cash. The entire conservatorship threat was nothing but an incestuous criminal conspiracy, finally giving me the exact leverage I needed to annihilate them today. I returned inside the house and found Nadine sitting perfectly still on the edge of our bed, staring blankly at the beige floral wallpaper. Her shoulders were slumped, and the vibrant light that usually danced in her eyes had completely vanished. The brutal humiliation of the viral video, combined with the sheer terror of Jared's legal threats, had taken a devastating toll on her gentle spirit. I walked slowly across the carpet and knelt on the floor directly in front of her. I took her cold, trembling hands into my own, rubbing them gently to restore some warmth. She did not cry, but the profound silence radiating from her felt infinitely heavier than any scream. I looked directly into her eyes and spoke with absolute, unbreakable conviction. I promised her that I would never allow anyone to strip away her dignity or force her from the safety of this home. I swore that the people who deliberately stole her joy and violated her peace would pay for their cruelty with their entire futures. I assured her that the forged document Jared had thrown at me was completely worthless and that I had already deployed the necessary countermeasures to neutralize his vicious attack. I watched a tiny flicker of hope return to her exhausted expression. She squeezed my hands back silently, thanking me for my unwavering protection. I knew that before I completely dismantled Jared's life, I needed to restore Nadine's sense of self. The emotional damage inflicted by the Clippers required immediate attention. I told her to get dressed because we were leaving the house for a very important personal appointment. We were going to reclaim the crown that had been so viciously stolen from her. I drove us to the most exclusive high-end wig boutique in the downtown fashion district. Decades ago, long before I built my logistics empire, Nadine worked as a dedicated high school guidance counselor. She spent countless hours mentoring a brilliant but deeply troubled student, helping her secure a college scholarship and completely turning her life around. That former student was now the wealthy, internationally renowned owner of this very boutique. She greeted Nadine with tears of profound gratitude and ushered us into a private, luxurious styling suite. I sat quietly on a velvet sofa as the owner personally measured my wife and brought out her finest inventory. They meticulously selected a stunning hand-tied custom piece crafted from the highest quality materials. The stylist skillfully shaped the wig until it perfectly replicated the exact cut, color, and texture of Nadine's original beautiful hair. I watched the transformation happen in real time. As the final adjustments were made, Nadine turned to face the large vanity mirror. Her posture changed instantly. Her spine straightened, her shoulders squared, and a genuine radiant smile broke across her face. The heavy shadow of the viral humiliation completely evaporated from her spirit. She was no longer the vulnerable victim trapped in that wedding suite. She looked completely revitalized, exuding an undeniable aura of regal elegance. The owner absolutely refused to accept a single penny for the masterpiece, claiming she had been waiting years for the opportunity to repay Nadine's life-changing kindness. I watched my wife run her fingers through the flawless strands, knowing her restored confidence was my greatest victory of the day. While Nadine was being carefully fitted and styled, I stepped out onto the busy sidewalk to handle the more sinister side of my ongoing campaign. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a highly encrypted number provided by Arthur Harrington. Within minutes, I secured the services of an elite private investigator, a former federal agent renowned for his absolute discretion and devastating efficiency. I bypassed any pleasantries and gave him a highly specific surgical assignment. I commanded him to launch a comprehensive background investigation into Harper's older cousin, the supposed medical professional who had boldly signed the fraudulent cognitive decline evaluation. I instructed the investigator to tear apart the financial records and operating licenses of the specific suburban clinic listed on the forged conservatorship document. I needed irrefutable proof that the entire medical diagnosis was a fabricated sham designed solely to hijack my assets. I emphasized that time was of the essence, as Jared was already weaponizing the fake paperwork against me. The investigator absorbed the details with cold professionalism, promising to deploy his vast network of informants immediately. I ended the call feeling a dark satisfaction settle in my chest. Jared believed his crude forgery was a masterful checkmate. He completely failed to realize that I possessed the resources and the calculated patience to investigate every single vulnerability in his sloppy plan. I walked back into the boutique to join my radiant wife, knowing the invisible gears of absolute destruction were already turning flawlessly in the background. 3 hours later, as Nadine and I were enjoying a quiet lunch at a corner cafe, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from the private investigator. I excused myself and stepped outside to answer. The investigator delivered a rapid, devastating summary of his findings, completely blowing the case wide open. Harper's cousin did not run a legitimate medical clinic. He operated a massive, highly illegal prescription pill mill, recklessly dispensing controlled substances for cash without conducting any actual medical examinations. He was currently under active covert surveillance by local narcotics detectives. Furthermore, the investigator uncovered a far more terrifying truth regarding my son's sudden financial desperation. Jared had not just drained my accounts to fund Harper's lavish social media aesthetic. He had developed a severe hidden gambling addiction and currently owed a ruthless underground syndicate exactly $80,000 in outstanding debts. The criminals had given him a strict deadline threatening extreme physical violence against him and Harper if he failed to pay. The entire viral wedding prank and the subsequent fake GoFundMe campaign were a desperate, frantic bid to quickly raise cash to satisfy his violent creditors. When the crowdfunding money was not released fast enough, Jared immediately pivoted to the fraudulent conservatorship scheme to forcefully seize my retirement savings. He was desperately trying to rob me simply to save his own miserable life. I absorbed the information with chilling clarity. Jared was not just an arrogant fool, he was a desperate hunted animal caught in a deadly trap of his own making. I hung up the phone, realizing the syndicate's brutal timeline gave me the absolute perfect leverage to watch his entire world spectacularly collapse today. Desperate for rapid cash after her debit cards violently declined at the luxury real estate office, Harper launched an incredibly aggressive online smear campaign against me. She knew she needed an immediate villain to maintain her lucrative digital engagement and quickly distract her millions of followers from the sudden cancellation of her highly publicized beachfront condo purchase. She locked herself in her current apartment and meticulously recorded a highly edited, tearful video tailored perfectly for maximum viral outrage. She stared directly into the camera lens with perfectly applied waterproof mascara running down her flushed cheeks, crying hysterically about surviving a toxic family dynamic. She explicitly accused me of severe financial abuse, weaponizing my name to paint me as a controlling, manipulative monster who ruthlessly sabotaged her beautiful new marriage. She boldly claimed I maliciously stole her designated wedding funds out of pure spite and purposefully left her and Jared completely homeless on their honeymoon. She actively manipulated the false narrative to suggest I had always hated her and was punishing Jared simply for falling deeply in love. The entire performance was a masterclass in digital deception, meticulously splicing out-of-context video clips from the wedding day to corroborate her fabricated tragedy. She ended the broadcast by tearfully begging her devoted followers to donate to a brand new emergency crowdfunding link, framing the massive theft as a desperate fight for her basic survival. The deeply calculated upload spread like absolute wildfire across every major social media platform within minutes. Her devoted fans immediately mobilized, blindly consuming the manufactured drama without demanding a single piece of actual evidence. She had successfully turned the entire internet against an innocent, retired old man, completely ignoring the sheer devastation she had personally inflicted upon my vulnerable wife just a few days prior to this terrible event. The digital internet mob mobilized quickly and aggressively against us. Within hours of the video going live across the web, the intense online hatred transformed directly into terrifying physical harassment right outside our front door. Anonymous followers easily discovered our home address and descended upon our quiet neighborhood like a swarm of angry locusts. Our beautiful front yard was heavily vandalized by cruel strangers maliciously throwing rotting garbage and shattered glass onto the green lawn. A group of aggressive teenagers stood out on the sidewalk holding handmade cardboard signs screaming vicious insults at our tightly closed windows, while actively streaming their vile behavior to Harper's dedicated followers. Local news reporters began calling our home landline incessantly, desperately hunting for an exclusive comment regarding the explosive viral controversy. The phone rang constantly, a relentless digital assault designed to break our psychological peace. Nadine sat on the edge of the living room sofa, watching the chaotic local news coverage on television with a rapidly rising surge of profound anxiety. Her hands trembled as she witnessed her own home displayed on national broadcast television, falsely branded as a house of horrific abuse. I could clearly see the sheer terror returning to her exhausted eyes. She did not deserve to spend her delicate cancer recovery hiding like a frightened criminal in her own sanctuary. I marched over to the television and turned the power off entirely. I walked to the kitchen wall and physically unplugged the landline phone cord from the jack, killing the incessant ringing instantly. I moved methodically through every single room in the house, pulling down the heavy blackout blinds and securely locking the deadbolts. I completely sealed us off from the toxic madness raging outside, transforming our home into an impenetrable fortress, while I finalized my counterattack against them today. The deafening, ugly chaos raging outside my window did not fracture my calm demeanor for a single moment. I remained entirely unaffected by the aggressive media pressure and the pathetic internet mob currently attempting to destroy my reputation. I poured myself a dark cup of black coffee and sat quietly at my desk, calmly reviewing the damning evidence Arthur Harrington had securely forwarded to my encrypted laptop. My absolute stoicism was not an act of blind denial, but a highly disciplined reaction forged in the chaotic fires of my professional past. Decades before I ultimately retired, I spent my long career dealing directly with ruthless union bosses, corrupt city officials, and desperate corporate blackmailers who frequently utilized extreme intimidation tactics to forcefully seize control of my lucrative construction contracts. They often attempted to break my spirit using public smear campaigns, vicious newspaper leaks, and aggressive physical protests directly at my building sites. I learned a vital, unshakable lesson during those turbulent years of fiercely fighting for my logistics empire. The public anger generated by a mob is entirely temporary and hollow, but properly executed legal documents remain absolutely permanent. An internet scandal evaporates within a week, but a federal prison sentence completely ends a life forever. I refused to waste my valuable energy responding to Harper's childish digital tantrums. I allowed her to falsely believe she was currently winning the war, giving her enough excess rope to comfortably hang her entire future. I deliberately prepared a devastating legal trap, meticulously organizing the undeniable proof of their medical fraud and massive financial theft. I knew Jared's hidden gambling debts would inevitably force him into making a fatal, rushed mistake. I simply needed to maintain absolute, unwavering discipline and patiently wait for his immense greed to completely blind his flawed judgment today. The absolute silence of my secure, darkened home was suddenly violently shattered by a deafening crash echoing from the front living room. I immediately jumped up from my sturdy desk chair, adrenaline instantly flooding my veins as I sprinted aggressively down the narrow hallway to investigate the loud disturbance. I found my large front bay window completely destroyed, the expensive thick glass pulverized into 1,000 sharp glittering fragments scattered violently across our Persian rug. A heavy, coarse red brick lay resting directly in the center of the debris, bringing the harsh reality of the outside world directly into my private sanctuary. A piece of crumpled, dirty white paper was securely wrapped around the solid masonry, fastened tightly with a thick black rubber band. I cautiously approached the wreckage, my eyes scanning the dark, empty street through the broken window frame, but the cowardly attacker who threw the projectile had already fled into the night. I leaned down carefully, avoiding the jagged glass shards, and picked up the heavy brick to examine the attached message. I slipped the thick rubber band off the stone and slowly unfolded the coarse paper. The message was hastily written in thick, aggressive black marker containing a series of highly specific, violent threats, promising severe physical harm and absolute destruction if an outstanding $80,000 debt was not paid in full within exactly 2 days. The terrifying realization hit me instantly as I read the intended recipient's name printed boldly at the very bottom of the page. The ruthless underground loan sharks had aggressively tracked the wrong address. They had dangerously confused my quiet suburban house with Jared's primary luxury residence. The highly violent, desperate debt collectors were now actively targeting the completely wrong house, escalating the absolute physical danger for us here tonight. The morning sun cast harsh, jagged shadows across the glittering sea of broken glass covering my living room floor. I stood silently amidst the crystalline wreckage when cautious footsteps crunched against the debris on my front porch. Jared and Harper materialized outside the shattered window frame, their faces twisted into perfectly rehearsed masks of sheer terror. Jared clutched a cheap plastic-wrapped fruit basket tightly against his chest, like a pathetic peace offering. He peered through the jagged opening and immediately launched into a frantic, trembling monologue about fearing for their absolute safety. Harper huddled closely behind him, her designer clothes strategically wrinkled and her expensive makeup smudged to project an image of total vulnerability. They shamelessly claimed that anonymous internet trolls had suddenly escalated the online harassment into severe, credible death threats. Jared begged for temporary shelter inside my secure home, spinning a fabricated tale about violent followers, discovering their primary address and driving them out into the cold streets. I stared at my son, knowing with absolute certainty that the digital mob was not hunting them today. The terrifying, ruthless loan sharks demanding $80,000 were the actual predators circling his leased luxury apartment. He was deliberately attempting to use the viral internet controversy as a convenient smokescreen to hide his massive underground gambling debts. Jared pushed the flimsy fruit basket toward me through the broken window, his voice cracking as he pleaded for my paternal protection against the imaginary online monsters. He expected me to just blindly absorb his fabricated tragedy and welcome him back with open arms. I watched his desperate performance with icy clarity, recognizing that a cornered rat will say absolutely anything to secure a safe hiding place when the violent consequences of his own actions finally arrive at his very own front door. As Jared continued to aggressively push his pathetic narrative through the shattered glass, my sharp eyes caught a tiny rhythmic pulse of red light. The subtle illumination emanated directly from the slightly unzipped opening of Harper's oversized designer purse resting against her hip. She was standing at a highly calculated angle, angling the hidden lens to perfectly frame my face and capture my every reaction. The devious strategy immediately materialized in my mind with crystal clarity. They had not come to this house seeking genuine refuge or offering a sincere apology for their massive financial crimes. They had actively orchestrated this unexpected morning visit as a malicious psychological ambush designed specifically to completely validate their fraudulent medical conservatorship petition. Harper was secretly recording the entire interaction, eagerly hoping to capture me acting violent, abusive, or mentally unstable. They desperately needed high-definition digital footage of a crazy old man losing his temper to present before a family court judge tomorrow morning. If they could successfully provoke me into screaming or threatening them on camera, the forged cognitive decline report signed by her corrupt cousin would instantly appear completely legitimate. They wanted me to yell, to curse, to shatter the remaining glass, or to forcefully drive them off my front porch. Every single tear streaming down Harper's pale face was a meticulously manufactured prop designed to manipulate my raw emotions and trigger a highly explosive paternal outburst. She kept her trembling hands clasped together, playing the frightened victim while quietly directing a high-resolution camera right at my chest. The sheer wickedness of their coordinated scheme was absolutely breathtaking. I recognized the extremely dangerous legal trap resting quietly inside that expensive leather bag, and I absolutely refused to ever give them a single inch of usable footage here right now today. I stepped back from the shattered bay window and calmly unlocked the heavy, solid oak front door, swinging it wide open with flawless, unshakable politeness. I gestured warmly toward the clean living room, warmly inviting my deceitful son and his treacherous bride to step inside, away from the crisp morning chill. Jared hesitated for a brief second, visibly confused by my completely serene demeanor before cautiously stepping over the threshold. Harper followed closely behind him, her hidden camera still perfectly aimed directly at my face. I completely neutralized her desperate attempt to provoke a violent confrontation by projecting an aura of measured, absolute kindness. I courteously offered them a seat on the comfortable brown leather sofa, politely insisting they make themselves feel entirely at home. I walked into the kitchen and prepared a fresh pot of herbal tea, returning with 3 delicate porcelain cups resting upon a silver serving tray. I sat across from them, maintaining a perfectly gentle, grandfatherly smile that betrayed absolutely none of the lethal traps I had meticulously set. When Jared tried to escalate the conversation by loudly blaming the vicious internet trolls for his current misery, I simply nodded with profound sympathetic understanding. I treated them exactly like distant, highly unfortunate guests who had experienced a terrible string of exceptionally bad luck in their previously privileged lives. I answered every single aggressive question with soft, beautifully composed sentences, completely starving their hidden camera of the explosive rage they desperately needed. Harper shifted uncomfortably on the soft cushions, her fake tears drying up as she slowly realized that her manipulative ambush was failing spectacularly right now. I controlled the entire emotional atmosphere of the room, effortlessly successfully giving them absolutely zero usable video footage to falsely validate their fraudulent, highly illegal court documents right here today. Deeply frustrated by my absolutely perfect composure, Jared finally snapped. The polite grandfatherly hospitality I projected was actively suffocating his carefully planned digital ambush, leaving him without a single shred of the explosive, unhinged reaction he required. He abruptly stood up from the brown leather sofa and aggressively slammed his empty porcelain teacup down onto the silver serving tray. He reached inside his tailored jacket pocket, retrieving a heavily folded legal document, and forcefully slid the thick parchment across my polished glass coffee table. Jared masked his sheer desperation with a highly practiced, confident sneer, casually claiming the paperwork was merely a standard non-disclosure agreement. He boldly insisted that signing the simple contract would legally protect our entire family from the relentless press currently circling our properties. He falsely promised that if I just applied my signature to the dotted line, he would personally ensure the highly vicious internet mob completely retreated and the viral online harassment abruptly stopped. I remained comfortably seated, maintaining my perfectly relaxed posture as I reached out to examine his latest fraudulent offering. I picked up the document and slowly scanned the intricate, dense paragraphs hiding within the incredibly tiny fine print. The utterly treacherous reality of his so-called protective agreement instantly revealed itself in sharp, undeniable clarity. It was not a harmless non-disclosure contract designed to shield us from aggressive tabloid journalists. It was an irrevocable, legally binding transfer of full financial power of attorney, meticulously drafted to surrender absolute control of my entire multi-million-dollar estate directly into his greedy hands. I lowered the pages, locking my cold eyes directly onto his trembling frame. He had just foolishly delivered the final piece of undeniable, concrete evidence I needed to officially guarantee his complete legal and personal destruction in front of a judge today. Jared aggressively leaned across the polished glass coffee table and pushed a sleek silver pen directly toward my resting right hand. He simultaneously initiated a pathetic, highly calculated display of theatrical weeping, forcing large artificial tears to cascade down his flushed cheeks. He clasped his hands together in a posture of mock desperation, begging me to apply my signature to the bottom line immediately. His voice trembled with rehearsed vulnerability as he promised that this single signature would magically make the relentless media harassment disappear forever. He spun a ridiculous narrative claiming the document was merely a protective shield that would allow his legal team to instantly silence the vicious internet mob currently surrounding our family. Harper shifted her weight on the soft leather sofa, carefully adjusting the angle of her oversized designer purse. I clearly tracked her calculated movements as she subtly repositioned the hidden camera lens to ensure it captured the exact moment pen met paper. She wanted an unobstructed, clear digital recording of my apparent total submission to their demands. She maintained her own mask of silent, trembling victimhood, dabbing her dry eyes with a pristine white tissue, while secretly documenting what they believed was their ultimate triumph. Their synchronized performance was a truly sickening display of predatory greed disguised as familial concern. Jared leaned closer, his breath carrying the stale scent of nervous sweat and expensive cologne, urging me to just sign the paper so we could all finally find peace. He spoke with the soothing, patronizing tone a person might use when attempting to pacify a confused, frightened child. He genuinely believed his pathetic display of fake remorse and fabricated victimhood had completely neutralized my defenses. I sat perfectly still, observing the shallow depth of his absolute betrayal playing out right inside my own home. I ignored his theatrical weeping entirely and slowly picked up the heavy document resting upon the glass table. I did not merely skim the bold headings or blindly accept his spoken summary. I read every single printed word thoroughly, my eyes methodically scanning the incredibly dense paragraphs containing the treacherous fine print. Jared assumed I was just a tired old man who would easily succumb to intense emotional pressure, but he had tragically forgotten my actual professional history. Before retiring to a quiet suburban life, I spent 4 decades serving as the founding chief executive officer of a massive international logistics firm. I built my corporate empire by negotiating incredibly complex international shipping contracts, fighting hostile corporate takeovers, and completely dismantling aggressive competitor agreements. I personally knew modern contract law vastly better than most practicing attorneys in this city. As my eyes tracked across the crisp white paper, I easily deciphered the sophisticated legal mechanisms hidden beneath the standard boilerplate language. The document was not a simple non-disclosure agreement designed to manage temporary public relations issues. I recognized the highly specific predatory clauses meticulously engineered to systematically strip me of my entire physical estate. The treacherous paperwork granted Jared absolute irrevocable power of attorney over my physical assets, my private banking portfolios, and my comprehensive healthcare directives. By applying my signature, I would be legally transferring total ownership of my entire life directly into his greedy hands without a single safety mechanism attached. He had hired a very expensive, ruthless attorney to draft this airtight financial prison. He sat there crying fake tears, eagerly waiting for me to willingly lock myself inside a cage. I kept my face entirely devoid of emotion, internally marveling at the pure, unadulterated evil radiating from my only biological child sitting opposite me right now. I placed the thick pages completely flat onto the glass surface and looked up to meet his expectant gaze. I slowly reached forward and picked up the sleek silver pen he had provided. Harper held her breath, keeping her hidden camera perfectly trained on my hands as I deliberately lowered the ink toward the paper. I did not argue, I did not throw the pen, and I certainly did not provide the explosive emotional outburst they so desperately craved. Instead, I pressed the metal tip against the designated line and deliberately signed the fraudulent legal document today. However, I did not utilize my actual legal signature. During my extensive tenure managing massive international logistics contracts, I developed a highly specific, uniquely stylized signature that I secretly reserved exclusively for completely invalid or openly contested drafts. This alternate signature contained inverted loops, altered slants, and a vastly different structural flow. It was a subtle but legally undeniable visual marker proving that the document was signed under duress or lacked genuine executive authorization. It looked entirely authentic to an untrained amateur like Jared, but it remained completely distinct from the official verified signatures securely filed with my private bank branches and federal tax records. Any competent forensic handwriting expert or financial institution would immediately reject the document as a blatant forgery upon careful secondary inspection. I calmly finished the final sweeping loop of the invalid signature and placed the silver pen back down onto the coffee table. I had just handed my deceitful son a completely worthless single piece of paper wrapped inside a beautiful illusion of absolute victory. I purposefully created the ultimate legal bait, allowing him to believe he possessed the master key to my massive fortune, while actually cementing his criminal intent in permanent blue ink right here today. Jared aggressively snatched the signed legal document from the coffee table with staggering speed, his greedy fingers clutching the thick paper like a winning lottery ticket. A wicked, triumphant smile immediately broke through his pathetic mask of fake tears, completely erasing any lingering illusion of genuine familial remorse. He shoved the paperwork deeply into his tailored jacket pocket, abruptly standing up without offering a single word of gratitude. Harper instantly mirrored his sudden shift in demeanor, dropping her trembling victim act and swiftly zipping her designer purse closed to end the covert recording. They practically sprinted out of my front door, eager to rush back to their luxury apartment and legally finalize their massive theft. I locked the heavy deadbolt behind them, feeling an absolute icy calm wash over my entire body. Exactly 10 minutes after their hasty departure, my secure smartphone buzzed loudly with an urgent incoming call. It was the elite private investigator I had hired yesterday, delivering a highly critical, time-sensitive update regarding the dangerous underground gambling syndicate. The ruthless loan sharks had officially lost their patience and given Jared a strict 24-hour deadline to pay his massive $80,000 debt in full. If he failed to deliver the cash, they promised severe physical consequences. The investigator confirmed my darkest suspicion. Jared foolishly planned to utilize the fake power of attorney document to fraudulently wire the syndicate's required money directly from my primary retirement fund first thing tomorrow morning. He genuinely believed my stylized signature had finally granted him supreme financial authority over my entire estate. I ended the call and smiled into the quiet room. My arrogant son was blindly walking straight into a catastrophic, inescapable federal wire fraud trap, and I was perfectly positioned to orchestrate his ultimate legal downfall tomorrow. The relentless rain began to batter the windows of our suburban home shortly after I departed for an evening meeting with Arthur Harrington. I needed to finalize the legal documentation regarding the federal wire fraud trap we had meticulously set for tomorrow morning. Nadine remained perfectly safe inside the house, or so I incorrectly assumed. Jared parked his luxury vehicle 2 blocks away to avoid triggering my newly installed perimeter cameras. He used his original childhood key to silently breach the back terrace door before the automated security grid could fully engage. He crept through the shadowed hallway and suddenly appeared in the warmly lit kitchen. Nadine stood by the marble island brewing a cup of chamomile tea. The sudden intrusion made her gasp, but the shock quickly shifted into deep apprehension as she registered the terrifying darkness swirling inside his eyes. Jared completely dropped the pathetic, weeping victim act he had weaponized against me earlier that morning. He stepped aggressively into her personal space, trapping her tightly against the cold granite countertops. The overwhelming stench of stale alcohol and raw, desperate panic radiated from his soaked clothes. He slammed his heavy palms against the marble, trapping her in a highly intimidating physical cage. He did not ask how she was feeling or offer a single word of familial comfort. Instead, he coldly demanded the immediate numeric combination to the heavy steel master safe hidden deeply inside my private study. He knew I kept a significant reserve of untraceable emergency cash locked inside that vault. He desperately needed those physical funds right now to momentarily placate the violent syndicate enforcers hunting him down tonight. Nadine stared up at the towering figure of her only child, her heart breaking as she finally saw the ruthless monster he had chosen to become. Jared relentlessly pounded his heavy fist against the marble island, completely shattering the quiet, peaceful tranquility of the kitchen. He began shouting wildly, his voice echoing with extreme malice as he hurled deeply unforgiving accusations directly into his mother's face. He cruelly declared that her ongoing cancer treatments were a massive financial burden, draining the family wealth he believed rightfully belonged to him. He screamed that her fragile illness was a highly inconvenient distraction, actively destroying his upward social trajectory. Jared pointed a violently shaking finger at her chest, boldly asserting that she owed him this specific stack of emergency cash as direct compensation for maliciously ruining his flawless wedding aesthetic. He fully blamed her justified tears for the severe drop in Harper's digital engagement metrics and the subsequent cancellation of their lucrative brand sponsorships. Nadine remained completely silent, refusing to validate his disgusting verbal assault with a response. Her steady, unwavering composure only served to further ignite his chaotic rage. Losing whatever tiny shred of humanity he still possessed, Jared lunged forward and aggressively grabbed her right arm. His thick fingers dug ruthlessly into her delicate skin, bruising the exact spot where the hospital nurses routinely administered her painful chemotherapy infusions. He attempted to physically intimidate her, using his towering height and brute strength to forcefully drag her out of the kitchen and directly toward the private study where the heavy iron vault awaited. He barked vile commands, demanding she punch in the access code immediately or suffer the severe consequences of his wrath. He mistakenly believed her physical illness somehow equated to absolute helpless weakness. He assumed she would simply crumble under his terrifying physical pressure and hand over the money out of sheer maternal fear. Jared severely underestimated the fierce, unbreakable resilience deeply burning inside her soul. Jared completely made the fatal, highly arrogant assumption that my beautiful wife was entirely defenseless. He foolishly looked at her slender frame and falsely concluded she was nothing but a fragile victim waiting to be completely broken. He had conveniently ignored the undeniable reality of her incredible past. Long before Nadine ever experienced the comfortable luxury of our quiet suburban lifestyle, she was born and raised entirely within the unforgiving, brutally tough neighborhoods of East Detroit. She spent her formative years navigating incredibly dangerous streets, surviving absolute poverty, and ferociously defending her younger siblings against vicious local gangs. The grueling cancer treatments had undoubtedly weakened her aging physical body, but the toxic, poisonous chemical drips had never even touched her magnificent, unyielding spirit. That pure, unbreakable Detroit steel still ran fiercely through her veins. When Jared aggressively tightened his punishing grip around her bruised arm, he finally ignited the dormant warrior sleeping quietly inside her. Nadine did not scream for help or collapse in absolute terror. Instead, she locked her blazing eyes directly onto his and forcefully twisted her shoulder with astonishing, explosive leverage. She violently broke entirely free from his oppressive, commanding grip in one fluid defensive motion. Jared stumbled slightly, momentarily caught completely off balance by her highly unexpected burst of raw strength. Nadine instantly stepped toward the heavy iron stovetop resting directly behind her. She firmly grasped the solid brass handle of a massive, extremely heavy cast-iron skillet lid sitting casually on the back burner. Without a single second of hesitation or misplaced maternal mercy, she rapidly swung the incredibly dense metal plate horizontally through the humid kitchen air. She brutally smacked the heavy iron lid squarely across the side of his arrogant face with a sickeningly loud, bone-rattling crack that completely silenced his vile threats forever. Jared instantly collapsed backward onto the polished hardwood floor, completely stunned by the sheer explosive force of the unexpected physical impact. He instinctively clutched his rapidly swelling cheek in absolute shock, staring up at his mother with wide, entirely bewildered eyes as a thin trail of dark crimson blood leaked slowly from his split lip. He could not fully comprehend that the fragile cancer patient he intended to ruthlessly bully had just decisively overpowered his absolute cruelty. Nadine stood firmly over his trembling body, still tightly gripping the heavy iron lid like a protective shield. She looked down at the pathetic intruder bleeding on her kitchen floor and spoke with a voice colder than freezing ice. She clearly declared that he was officially no longer her beloved son. She told him that the beautiful boy she had lovingly raised died the exact moment he selfishly authorized his vicious bride to shave her head. She aggressively pointed toward the shattered back terrace door, commanding him to crawl back out into the relentless pouring rain where he truly belonged. Jared scrambled frantically backward, slipping on the damp floorboards as he practically threw himself out onto the flooded patio to escape her unyielding wrath. The second he fearfully cleared the threshold, Nadine decisively slammed the heavy door shut and immediately activated the master lockdown protocol I had permanently installed years ago. Thick, completely impenetrable solid steel security shutters rapidly descended over every single window and exterior entrance, instantly transforming our quiet suburban home into an absolute fortress. Jared stood completely drenched in the freezing mud of the dark backyard, screaming hysterically against the unyielding metal barriers. He violently promised that he would successfully seize the entire estate by absolute legal force tomorrow morning, using his brand new, heavily forged legal power of attorney. The heavy rain stopped just before dawn, giving way to a crisp, deceivingly bright morning as the final phase of my absolute retaliation officially commenced. I sat quietly at my study desk with a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, monitoring the digital landscape through my encrypted tablet. Harper had aggressively launched a massive, highly publicized brand partnership across all her primary social media channels. She proudly announced a lucrative exclusive sponsorship deal with an elite international cosmetics company known for its premium skincare products. To maximize her digital engagement and falsely paint herself as a compassionate advocate, she had maliciously repurposed the viral video of Nadine's forced haircut. Harper blatantly repackaged my wife's horrific public humiliation into a heavily monetized, highly stylized cancer awareness campaign without ever securing a single ounce of legal permission. She added dramatic music and fake inspirational voiceovers to the footage, framing her own vicious cruelty as an act of profound familial bravery and empowering solidarity. She eagerly urged her millions of dedicated followers to purchase the sponsor's expensive beauty products using her customized promotional discount code. She completely commodified Nadine's immense physical suffering, transforming my wife's fragile health struggle into a massive cash grab to rapidly replace the financial backing I had completely severed the previous day. Her absolute lack of basic human decency was staggering, but her immense arrogance was entirely predictable. She firmly believed she had successfully outsmarted the ensuing public relations nightmare by hiding behind a massive corporate shield. She thought tying her toxic personal brand to a wealthy global international conglomerate would magically insulate her from any impending legal consequences. She confidently and loudly boasted about her massive incoming paycheck, completely unaware that she had just blindly chained herself directly to the very corporate engine I secretly and absolutely controlled. I left my house shortly after viewing Harper's disgusting promotional video and drove directly back to Arthur Harrington's downtown law office. I bypassed the receptionist entirely and walked straight into his private executive suite, locking the heavy mahogany door firmly behind me. Arthur was already seated at his expansive desk, fully expecting my urgent arrival. He had a massive, interactive presentation brightly displayed across his large digital monitor. We immediately began meticulously reviewing the complex corporate structure belonging to the specific cosmetics company that foolishly sponsored my daughter-in-law. Harper was a shallow, uneducated girl who completely failed to understand the invisible webs of supreme financial power operating quietly behind the scenes. Before I officially retired from active corporate management, I deliberately diversified my vast personal wealth into a highly secretive, aggressive private equity holding company. Decades of brilliantly executing hostile corporate takeovers and ruthlessly liquidating failing commercial enterprises provided me with an unimaginable level of deeply hidden financial leverage. My private holding company currently retained a 40% controlling stake directly inside the massive parent corporation that exclusively owned Harper's brand new cosmetic sponsor. I possess the absolute executive authority to single-handedly dismantle their entire global board of directors if they ever dared to openly defy my strict personal directives. Arthur tapped his silver pen against the glowing screen, highlighting the direct chain of executive command leading straight from my hidden portfolio down to the specific marketing department that officially approved Harper's lucrative contract. I smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile as the undeniable reality of my absolute dominance fully materialized before my eyes. My foolish son and his vicious bride were currently dancing blindly upon a massive financial trapdoor, and my dominant hand rested very securely atop the incredibly heavy execution lever, completely right here today. I instructed Arthur to immediately dial the private cellular number of the chief executive officer managing the cosmetics corporation. The CEO answered the secure line within 2 rings, his voice highly respectful and acutely aware of my supreme hierarchical position. I bypassed all traditional corporate pleasantries and commanded his absolute undivided attention. I maintained an incredibly cold, utterly detached vocal tone as I systematically dismantled the pristine public image his marketing team had foolishly bought. I calmly informed the horrified executive that their highly publicized brand new digital influencer had actively committed severe elder abuse against the majority shareholder's beloved, recovering wife. I methodically laid out the undeniable facts, thoroughly detailing how Harper aggressively hijacked my wife's deeply traumatic cancer battle to fraudulently generate entirely unearned social media sympathy. I carefully explained the sickening reality behind her viral upload, explicitly proving that she maliciously shaved Nadine's head as a cruel, vindictive prank before illegally broadcasting the footage for immense financial gain. I did not stop there. I completely exposed Harper's active, ongoing involvement in a massive federal conspiracy to forcefully push a heavily forged medical conservatorship document through the local family court system. I clearly outlined the illegal prescription pill mill her corrupt cousin currently operated, permanently tying their shiny new brand ambassador directly to a highly dangerous, violent criminal syndicate. I casually mentioned the severe underground gambling debts threatening her husband's pathetic life. The terrified CEO remained completely silent on the other end of the line, aggressively absorbing the sheer magnitude of the impending public relations catastrophe currently tied to his massive company. I politely suggested he cleanly terminate Harper's lucrative promotional contract within the hour if he deeply desired to successfully keep his highly coveted corporate leadership position entirely intact for the absolute foreseeable future starting early tomorrow. Exactly 28 minutes after I abruptly terminated the private executive phone call, the massive international cosmetics corporation completely dropped Harper as their brand ambassador. They aggressively published a devastatingly comprehensive public press statement explicitly denouncing her horrifying toxic actions across every single major media platform globally. The massive company publicly condemned her vicious elder abuse rapidly, pulling every promotional discount code and formally announcing a highly destructive multi-million-dollar corporate lawsuit against her for severe contract fraud. Harper's entire fragile digital empire immediately began collapsing spectacularly in absolute real time. The incredibly swift, merciless corporate execution instantly shattered her shiny online shield, boldly exposing her malicious cruelty to the exact same rabid internet mob she had weaponized just a few hours prior. Her dedicated followers rapidly turned against her, viciously swarming her social media channels with overwhelming disgust and immediate mass unfollows. Arthur and I watched the beautiful digital carnage unfold directly on his large monitor, completely satisfied by the flawless precision of our surgical strike. While her fake kingdom brutally burned into digital ashes, Jared's phone suddenly rang. We silently tapped directly into his active cellular feed using our elite private investigators' specialized listening equipment. Harper was currently screaming absolutely hysterically on the other end of the line, completely paralyzed by sheer, unadulterated panic. She violently demanded that Jared instantly secure the stolen retirement money, right now. She wildly explained that they desperately needed those massive liquid funds to immediately hire incredibly expensive crisis management lawyers to somehow salvage her permanently ruined public reputation. She frantically begged him to aggressively finalize the fraudulent power of attorney document today. She completely lacked the fundamental realization that she was desperately crying to a heavily indebted, massively hunted gambling addict currently facing brutal extermination by dangerous underground criminals very early tomorrow. Jared and Harper violently pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors of the primary downtown financial institution, bringing the chaotic energy of their collapsing world directly into the serene, marble-floored lobby. Harper wore oversized dark sunglasses to hide her swollen, tear-stained eyes from the sparse morning crowd, trembling as the sheer magnitude of her public brand annihilation continued to destroy her digital reputation in real time. Jared moved with the aggressive, erratic desperation of a deeply hunted animal, his expensive suit heavily wrinkled from a completely sleepless night of sheer terror. He completely bypassed the standard teller line and aggressively marched straight toward the private executive suites reserved exclusively for elite high-net-worth clients. He forcefully kicked the frosted glass door open and cornered the senior branch manager behind his polished mahogany desk. Without offering a single word of polite introduction, Jared violently slammed the heavily folded, treacherously forged legal document directly onto the pristine leather blotter. He aggressively pointed a shaking finger at the paperwork, loudly demanding an immediate, irrevocable federal wire transfer of exactly $500,000. He arrogantly claimed he now possessed absolute, unshakable legal authority over his ailing father's comprehensive financial portfolio. He aggressively insisted the massive sum needed to be completely liquidated and routed instantly to an offshore holding account to secure emergency legal retainers and appease extremely violent unspoken debts. The startled bank manager leaned back in his heavy leather chair, visibly alarmed by the sheer hostility radiating from the desperate couple currently invading his quiet office. Jared slammed his fist against the desk aggressively, ordering the manager to stop staring and immediately execute the massive digital transfer before a looming, invisible 24-hour deadline expired and entirely destroyed his pathetic life, completely refusing to accept any administrative delays or standard corporate banking excuses today. The highly experienced bank branch manager slowly picked up the heavily creased legal document, meticulously adjusting his silver reading glasses to thoroughly scrutinize the unexpected paperwork. He maintained a perfectly neutral, intensely professional facial expression, while carefully analyzing the complex structural formatting and the distinctly stylized signature resting firmly at the bottom of the page. He swiveled his heavy leather chair toward his glowing computer monitor, rapidly typing a sequence of secure commands to access Corbin's highly restricted, ultra-exclusive executive banking portfolio. A silent, flashing red alert immediately populated across his private screen, definitively confirming the exact protocol he was strictly required to follow in this highly suspicious scenario. The manager calmly locked his digital terminal and politely turned back to face the extremely agitated young man aggressively hovering over his desk. He offered a smooth, deeply apologetic corporate smile, gently explaining that executing such an extraordinarily massive financial wire transfer legally required secondary internal authorization. He formally excused himself from the quiet office, politely claiming he absolutely needed to visit a highly secure, heavily vaulted terminal located deeper inside the massive building to properly bypass the strict federal security holds. He smoothly exited the room, securely clicking the heavy mahogany door shut and leaving the desperate couple completely alone. Jared instantly began pacing the opulent executive lobby like a caged predator, profusely sweating through his expensive tailored jacket as raw panic intensely flooded his veins. He obsessively checked the glowing screen of his expensive smartphone, agonizingly watching the digital numbers slowly tick closer toward the ruthless underground syndicate's terrifying 24-hour deadline. He aggressively bit his fingernails, wildly muttering frantic prayers while completely failing to realize that the polite, accommodating bank manager had absolutely no intention of ever processing his deeply, highly fraudulent wire transfer right here, right now, today. The agonizing tension inside the silent executive suite reached an absolutely unbearable boiling point, just as the heavy, ornate oak doors of the VIP banking room finally swung violently open. Jared desperately whipped his head around, fully expecting to see the compliant branch manager returning with the finalized wire transfer confirmation papers clutched securely in his hands. Instead, the sudden arrival instantly drained every single ounce of color directly from his flushed, sweating face. It was not the accommodating corporate bank manager who confidently stepped across the polished marble threshold today. It was me, standing incredibly tall and utterly unshakable, radiating an aura of absolute crushing authority. Arthur Harrington stood perfectly composed directly at my right side, firmly holding a thick, securely fastened leather briefcase containing the undeniable comprehensive evidence of their massive criminal conspiracy. Flanking my left side were two heavily armed, exceptionally stern federal agents representing the elite financial fraud division of the United States government. Their sharp, tailored dark suits barely concealed the prominent tactical equipment securely fastened to their rigid belts. They moved with absolute terrifying precision, strategically positioning themselves directly between the only exit and the horrified young couple currently trapped inside the luxurious office. Harper let out a high-pitched, pathetic gasp, instinctively clutching her designer purse tightly against her chest, as sheer, unadulterated terror violently flooded her widened eyes. Jared stumbled backward in complete disbelief, his knees practically buckling as he collided heavily against the edge of the mahogany desk. The beautiful illusion of his ultimate triumph shattered instantly into a million irreparable pieces. I stared directly into the deeply terrified eyes of my treacherous, scheming son, completely ready to finally deliver the extremely devastating legal consequences he had so aggressively earned right here, right now, in this very exact room with me today. I walked slowly toward the mahogany desk and calmly pointed a steady index finger directly at the fraudulent signature resting prominently at the bottom of the forged power of attorney document. Without breaking eye contact with my hyperventilating son, I swiftly retrieved my official federal identification card and precisely placed it right beside the treacherous paperwork. Arthur Harrington methodically opened his thick leather briefcase and formally presented the bank's certified signature registry, clearly displaying my genuine legally binding executive autograph for everyone to openly compare. The two highly distinct signatures fundamentally did not match completely, exposing the pathetic digital illusion Jared had foolishly attempted to orchestrate. His incredibly arrogant, malicious scheme instantly crumbled under the absolute weight of undeniable concrete physical evidence. The taller of the two armed federal agents stepped aggressively forward, his authoritative voice easily shattering the heavy, suffocating silence polluting the executive suite. He formally informed Jared that aggressively attempting to fraudulently wire massive liquid funds across sovereign state lines using a deliberately forged legal document officially constitutes severe federal bank fraud. The stern agent clearly articulated that this massive financial crime carried a mandatory minimum sentence in a highly secure federal penitentiary, completely eradicating any pathetic hope of a quiet, wealthy escape. Jared collapsed onto the expensive carpet, frantically sobbing and wildly begging for parental mercy, while Harper practically sprinted toward the corner, desperately attempting to distance her toxic brand from his spectacular, highly televised criminal ruin. The beautiful, unshakable trap I had meticulously forged was now officially completely sprung. As the two highly trained federal agents aggressively pulled the heavy steel handcuffs from their rigid tactical belts, Jared screamed in absolute agony, finally realizing he had permanently destroyed his own incredibly pathetic life right here, right now in front of me this very morning today. The sudden realization of impending federal imprisonment completely shattered whatever pathetic facade Jared still possessed. Absolute blinding panic violently consumed his trembling frame as the two imposing federal agents stepped closer to execute his immediate arrest. His desperate survival instincts instinctively kicked into high gear, overriding any remaining shred of marital loyalty or basic human decency he might have harbored for his terrified bride. He aggressively raised his shaking right hand and pointed an accusatory finger directly at Harper's pale, tear-stained face. He began screaming frantically at the stern agents, wildly claiming that his vicious new wife had forcefully coerced him into executing the massive financial theft. Jared loudly insisted he was merely a helpless, manipulated victim desperately trying to satisfy her incredibly toxic, luxurious lifestyle demands. He shamelessly detailed her obsessive need for designer clothes, exclusive brand sponsorships, and lavish vacations, completely throwing his shocked bride under the proverbial bus in a pathetic attempt to save his own miserable skin. He begged the agents to believe that the fraudulent power of attorney and the illegal wire transfer were entirely her malicious ideas designed to rapidly drain his family wealth. Jared aggressively spun a desperate narrative painting Harper as an evil mastermind who had ruthlessly preyed upon his naive vulnerabilities and actively weaponized his underground gambling debts to force his compliance today. The sheer speed with which he betrayed the woman he had just married was absolutely breathtaking to witness. He sacrificed his entire relationship without a single moment of hesitation, loudly declaring her the sole criminal architect of the entire operation. His cowardly high-pitched screams echoed terribly across the polished marble walls of the executive banking suite, exposing the hollow, utterly self-serving core of his deeply corrupted character right here in front of me now today, right this second. Harper instantly recovered from her initial state of profound shock and viciously turned directly against her treacherous husband with incredible ferocity. The moment Jared attempted to falsely brand her as the sole criminal mastermind, her defensive instincts ruthlessly activated to ensure her own absolute survival today. She aggressively shoved her oversized designer purse onto the polished mahogany desk and rapidly pulled out her glowing, jewel-encrusted smartphone. Her manicured fingers flew across the digital glass screen, eagerly navigating directly into her heavily encrypted private messaging application to forcefully dismantle his pathetic, desperate narrative. She boldly stepped right toward the two imposing federal agents and proudly offered to display a highly damning collection of deeply incriminating digital text messages. Harper loudly announced that these specific, time-stamped conversations officially proved Jared meticulously planned the entire fraudulent medical conservatorship completely on his own accord. She aggressively highlighted several extremely detailed text exchanges, clearly showing him independently orchestrating the horribly forged cognitive decline report with her completely corrupt medical cousin. She vindictively pointed out the undeniable digital dates, loudly emphasizing that his sick, highly calculated financial conspiracy to steal my vast retirement wealth originated several long months before their lavish wedding ever happened. She eagerly offered to legally transfer every single text message, audio note, and shared digital blueprint straight to the Federal Fraud Division's secure servers to officially guarantee her total immunity. Harper shamelessly painted herself as a tragically naive woman who merely followed the strict, highly manipulative instructions explicitly delivered by her deeply abusive, gambling-addicted partner. They stood completely isolated inside the beautiful, luxurious banking suite, aggressively shredding their fake marital bond into absolute oblivion. Their mutual, incredibly toxic betrayals systematically delivered every single remaining piece of vital criminal evidence the federal investigators urgently required right here directly inside this specific room today. I stood silently beside Arthur Harrington, watching with profound emotional detachment as my only biological son and his treacherous bride aggressively destroyed each other right in the middle of the opulent banking lobby. Their vicious, desperate betrayal was an incredibly pathetic spectacle to witness, but it firmly solidified the devastating truth I had successfully ignored for decades. As a former logistics CEO who relentlessly built a massive international corporate empire from absolute scratch, I had successfully conquered every single external challenge the brutal business world ever presented. I possessed unparalleled strategic vision, ruthlessly outsmarting incredibly hostile competitors and fiercely defending my lucrative financial assets. However, as I watched Jared frantically screaming at the armed federal agents, I slowly realized the profound magnitude of my absolute greatest personal failure. my relentless drive to shield my family from the grueling, bitter hardships I had personally endured growing up directly created this monstrous, entitled adult. I had foolishly provided Jared with a life so incredibly comfortable, so entirely devoid of meaningful struggle or genuine consequence, that the spoiled boy never organically learned the fundamental concept of basic human loyalty. I bought him expensive sports cars, fully funded his elite university tuition, and endlessly covered his massive adult mistakes to falsely project an image of absolute familial perfection. My misguided, unchecked parental generosity directly transformed my son into a ruthless predator entirely incapable of experiencing authentic love or displaying genuine remorse. The taller federal agent aggressively stepped forward, efficiently grabbing Jared's frantically flailing wrists. The heavy steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly shut with a brutally crisp, entirely unforgiving metallic snap. The cold, heavy chains legally bound my deeply corrupted son, officially marking the absolute end of his incredibly privileged, deceitful existence, right here in this very room with me this precise morning, absolutely forever today. As the two stern federal agents forcefully pivoted Jared toward the heavy oak doors, the terrifying reality of his incredibly bleak future finally broke through his absolute arrogance. He desperately dragged his expensive leather shoes across the polished marble floor, violently struggling against the heavy steel handcuffs biting ruthlessly into his wrists. He wildly locked his tear-filled eyes directly onto my face and began screaming hysterically for my paternal mercy. He pathetically begged me to instantly deploy my massive corporate wealth to immediately pay his impending federal bail, loudly promising he would never attempt another financial betrayal if I just rescued him completely today. I remained perfectly rooted to the luxurious executive carpet, staring back at my weeping son with absolutely zero visible emotion. I did not shed a single tear or offer a single syllable of fatherly comfort to the dangerous criminal standing before me. I maintained a chilling, icy composure as I clearly informed him that securing federal bail legally requires presenting highly valuable, unencumbered physical collateral. I coldly reminded him that due to his massive underground gambling debts and utterly lavish lifestyle, he currently owned absolutely nothing of genuine financial value. I deliberately emphasized that he would remain completely locked inside a highly secure federal detention center, entirely without my financial protection. As Jared collapsed into a pathetic fit of uncontrollable sobbing, the second armed agent aggressively stepped directly toward his horrified bride. The stern investigator officially confiscated Harper's jewel-encrusted smartphone right from her trembling fingers, coldly declaring the device as heavily vital, extremely critical digital evidence directly supporting the massive medical fraud conspiracy. Jared wildly screamed from the busy hallway as he was forcefully dragged away, leaving Harper entirely trapped and utterly defenseless inside the very bank they had foolishly attempted to violently rob together today. The spectacular collapse of Jared and Harper's fraudulent marriage inside the bank lobby triggered an immediate, devastating chain reaction across the entire city. The highly detailed, highly specific text messages Harper had desperately volunteered to the Federal Fraud Division provided the exact probable cause the authorities urgently required. Within 2 hours of the bank confrontation, a heavily armed tactical unit from the Federal Bureau of Investigation forcefully descended upon the upscale medical clinic operated by Harper's corrupt cousin. Dozens of federal agents wearing tactical gear swarmed the pristine glass-fronted facility, swiftly securing the entire perimeter and completely locking down the building. Panicked patients and completely bewildered staff members were systematically ushered into the main reception area, while investigators methodically moved through the private examination rooms. Technicians immediately began disconnecting desktop computers, securely packing the digital hardware into specialized evidence boxes to preserve the highly compromised internal network data. Armed agents ruthlessly confiscated hundreds of physical patient files from the overflowing archive room, actively hunting for the specific paper trails explicitly linking the corrupt doctor to my son's malicious conspiracy. The federal authorities worked with terrifying surgical precision, systematically dismantling the beautiful facade of the luxury medical practice piece by piece. They relentlessly scoured every single digital server and physical filing cabinet, deeply determined to fully expose the vast network of criminal activity operating silently behind the respectable clinical walls. The sudden, overwhelming federal raid completely shattered the quiet afternoon, transforming the supposedly elite healthcare facility into an active, highly restricted federal crime scene. Every single stolen document, heavily forged signature, and completely fabricated medical diagnosis was rapidly being dragged directly out into the unforgiving light of day. The magnificent domino effect Harper had foolishly initiated was absolutely unstoppable right here now on this extremely satisfying, incredibly monumental, glorious day. As the incredibly thorough federal agents relentlessly processed the heavily guarded clinic, they successfully breached the primary executive safe hidden deeply inside the main office. The ruthless raid completely uncovered the exact highly detailed fake conservatorship documents Harper's corrupt cousin had meticulously prepared specifically to legally target both Nadine and me. The utterly fraudulent medical files were securely bundled together inside a thick manila envelope, explicitly outlining their incredibly malicious plan to systematically falsely diagnose us with severe cognitive decline. However, the dedicated investigators rapidly discovered something vastly more sinister, securely hidden directly beneath those treacherous family court papers. The comprehensive raid completely exposed a massive, incredibly lucrative illegal prescription drug operation actively flourishing behind the legitimate clinical facade. Harper's supposedly respectable cousin had been illegally distributing thousands of highly dangerous, heavily regulated narcotics to incredibly desperate underground buyers for several highly profitable years. The sheer scale of the incredibly toxic pill mill operation was absolutely staggering, instantly elevating the entire situation from a simple familial medical fraud case into a massive, highly prioritized federal narcotics investigation. The arrogant doctor was completely caught, incredibly unexpectedly, desperately attempting to permanently delete highly incriminating patient distribution ledgers directly from his locked private laptop. Heavily armed agents aggressively dragged him out of his luxurious office, physically placing him in thick steel handcuffs, directly in front of his entirely shocked, completely silent medical staff. He was formally arrested absolutely on the spot, his incredibly lucrative criminal empire permanently annihilated within mere minutes. This spectacular, extremely public arrest completely dismantled their entire looming legal threat against me absolutely forever. The heavily forged cognitive decline assessments instantly became totally worthless, entirely legally. Invalid pieces of useless scrap paper officially guaranteeing my permanent absolute safety, right here, right now, entirely and completely starting this very beautiful day. Realizing that her entire digital kingdom had spectacularly burned to ash and that federal agents were aggressively dismantling her corrupt medical connections, Harper desperately attempted to completely flee the state. She rapidly abandoned Jared at the downtown bank lobby without a single backward glance, selfishly securing a heavily overpriced private car to rush her directly toward the international airport terminal. She frantically booked a massive, highly expensive first-class one-way ticket to a remote tropical island, violently hoping to permanently escape the brutal impending legal consequences of her malicious crimes. She nervously dragged her heavy designer luggage across the polished terminal floors, wearing incredibly dark sunglasses to completely hide her deeply terrified, tear-stained face from the sparse afternoon crowds. However, her pathetic, utterly cowardly escape plan was completely severed before she could even reach the primary security checkpoint today. A highly coordinated team of stern federal law enforcement officers successfully intercepted her frantic retreat, actively blocking her designated path with absolute, incredibly terrifying physical authority. They smoothly stepped directly in front of her trembling frame, completely surrounding her expensive suitcases and officially trapping her within the crowded public terminal. A tall, incredibly authoritative federal agent aggressively demanded her identification instantly, confiscating her pristine blue passport directly from her wildly shaking fingers to officially prevent any possible international flight. As the stunned travelers watched the spectacular confrontation unfold, the agents loudly read her incredibly severe Miranda rights right there. She was formally publicly charged as a highly active accessory to both massive medical conspiracy and incredibly severe federal financial fraud. The cold, heavy steel handcuffs were aggressively locked onto her perfectly manicured wrists, permanently ending her glamorous digital lifestyle, and officially dragging her directly into a terrifying federal holding cell, this beautifully monumental, absolutely triumphant afternoon, completely securely today. While sitting alone inside a freezing, incredibly bleak federal holding cell later that evening, Jared frantically awaited his newly appointed public defender. He aggressively paced the tiny concrete room, shivering in his deeply wrinkled suit as the full, horrifying magnitude of his spectacular downfall finally materialized. The heavy iron door suddenly slid open, but it was absolutely not the government lawyer he so desperately expected to see. Instead, a sharply dressed, completely terrifying representative from the violent underground illegal gambling syndicate smoothly stepped into the highly restricted interrogation room. The ruthless enforcer wore a perfectly tailored dark suit and possessed incredibly cold, dead eyes that completely lacked a single ounce of human mercy. He casually sat across the metal table, completely bypassing all formal introductions to rapidly deliver an incredibly devastating, uncompromising ultimatum directly to my deeply trembling son. The enforcer calmly informed Jared that the incredibly powerful syndicate was already fully aware that all his personal bank accounts and fraudulent financial assets were now completely federally frozen, because he had completely failed to officially deliver the $80,000 before the strict morning deadline brutally expired. The violent underground organization was aggressively executing their alternative collection protocols. The extremely terrifying representative explicitly stated that the ruthless syndicate would now legally and physically seize total absolute ownership of Jared's incredibly lavish luxury condo directly to permanently settle the massive outstanding debt. They had already violently evicted his remaining personal possessions directly onto the pouring street and successfully changed the expensive digital locks. Jared collapsed onto the cold metal bench, sobbing hysterically as he completely realized his ultimate, horrifying fate. He was now officially a completely penniless, heavily hunted federal criminal, totally facing absolute destitution right here, right now, starting this beautifully magnificent night, safely, completely, and absolutely, permanently, forever today. The violent underground gambling syndicate wasted absolutely no time executing their ruthless collection protocol against my imprisoned son. A heavily armed crew of intimidating massive enforcers arrived directly at Jared's upscale, towering condominium complex late that night, carrying highly sophisticated breaching tools and aggressive intent. The imposing men marched past the unmanned front desk, their heavy boots thudding ominously against the polished marble floors of the luxurious residential lobby. The lead enforcer confidently gripped a stack of heavily forged eviction papers meticulously designed to look like authentic municipal court orders, granting them immediate physical possession of the valuable property. They fully intended to aggressively bypass all standard legal channels, planning to completely strip the lavish apartment of every single premium electronic device, expensive piece of designer furniture, and hidden luxury asset inside. Their ultimate goal was to rapidly liquidate the physical contents on the black market to instantly recover the massive $80,000 debt Jared had foolishly failed to pay. They stopped directly in front of the thick, beautifully carved wooden door securing his premium penthouse suite. The aggressive crew leader slammed his heavy fist against the expensive brass knocker, demanding immediate entry while falsely declaring absolute legal authority over the premises. When no one answered the completely empty apartment, the ruthless men swiftly abandoned their fake professional facade and instantly resorted to raw brute force. They aggressively wedged a heavy steel pry bar directly into the narrow doorframe, determined to violently splinter the expensive wood and forcibly seize the entire property tonight. They operated with terrifying, unchecked arrogance, fully believing Jared's desperate lies about possessing total legal ownership of the massive luxury estate themselves. They assumed this violent corporate takeover would be an incredibly swift, highly profitable, and completely unopposed home invasion right here tonight on this very day. As the ruthless criminals violently leveraged the heavy steel bar against the beautifully carved wood, the deafening sound of splintering timber loudly echoed down the pristine residential hallway. The aggressive syndicate enforcers eagerly prepared to completely storm the lavish penthouse, absolutely salivating over the immense luxury assets hidden securely within the quiet apartment. However, their incredibly destructive home invasion was abruptly halted before they could successfully breach the heavy locks. The massive steel doors of the main floor elevator suddenly slid open, revealing an incredibly stern, highly armed response team swiftly stepping out into the bright hallway. 4 heavily equipped building security guards aggressively flanked 3 uniformed local police officers, immediately rushing directly toward the terrified loan sharks with their tactical weapons completely drawn. The sheer presence of legitimate law enforcement instantly neutralized the syndicate's unchecked arrogance, forcefully compelling the aggressive thugs to rapidly drop their heavy pry bars directly onto the polished floor. The lead police officer stepped aggressively forward, shining a blinding tactical flashlight directly into the frightened enforcer's eyes. The stunned criminal frantically waved the heavily forged eviction papers in the air, loudly protesting his innocence, while desperately claiming he possessed a completely lawful municipal mandate to securely collect Jared's outstanding $80,000 personal debt. He boldly argued that Jared completely owned this massive luxury estate and legally surrendered it as final collateral. The stern police officer immediately grabbed the fake legal documents, crushing them tightly in his heavily gloved fist. He coldly informed the deeply panicked loan sharks that they were officially trespassing directly on highly secure, privately managed corporate property. He explicitly clarified that Jared absolutely never legally owned a single square inch of this incredibly expensive penthouse suite, actively destroying the brutal syndicate's desperate financial plan right here in this bright hallway, absolutely today. Before the violently panicked loan sharks could successfully process this devastating revelation, the pristine elevator doors forcefully parted a second time to deliver the ultimate corporate authority. Arthur Harrington stepped confidently into the bright residential hallway, holding a sleek black briefcase containing the incredibly dense, completely undeniable legal blueprints, securely governing the entire luxury tower. He calmly adjusted his expensive spectacles and formally addressed the heavily armed police officers, explicitly identifying himself as the chief executive counsel personally representing the authentic corporate owner. He ruthlessly pulled an incredibly thick stack of certified municipal property deeds from his secure bag, officially showcasing the absolute unshakable truth behind Jared's beautifully manufactured, entirely fake lifestyle. 10 completely prosperous years ago, right after permanently selling a massive international logistics division for a truly astronomical sum, I quietly utilized an anonymous, impenetrable corporate holding entity to silently purchase this entire metropolitan condominium complex. Jared was absolutely never a powerful, independent real estate magnate, aggressively conquering the competitive local housing market. He was merely an incredibly spoiled, entirely subsidized tenant, living absolutely rent-free directly inside my personal commercial investment portfolio. He foolishly leveraged a massive, unearned financial fantasy to impress superficial digital influencers and aggressively secure incredibly reckless underground loans. He had absolutely zero legal equity, zero tangible assets, and zero genuine executive power to unilaterally transfer a single square foot of this premium penthouse suite to anyone. Harrington coldly presented the certified documents directly to the terrified syndicate enforcer, effortlessly proving that the heavily indebted gambler had maliciously scammed the incredibly dangerous underground organization by aggressively using another man's massive corporate kingdom. The brutal realization instantly washed over the incredibly violent criminals, completely shattering their desperate financial hopes and brilliantly exposing Jared's incredibly pathetic, entirely fraudulent identity right here to everyone standing in attendance today. The incredibly tense atmosphere inside the residential corridor instantly shifted as the ruthless syndicate enforcers completely realized they had been masterfully played by a deeply pathetic, entirely broke gambling addict. The aggressive crew leader aggressively lowered his heavy steel pry bar, staring at the incredibly undeniable corporate property deeds with pure, unadulterated, murderous rage practically vibrating across his scarred face. He officially realized that Jared had maliciously lied about personally owning the incredibly expensive luxury asset to fraudulently secure their dangerous underground funding. The incredibly violent criminals completely understood that they could absolutely never successfully confiscate private corporate real estate from a deeply protected international holding entity. Without speaking a single word of protest against the heavily armed police officers, the crew leader slowly backed away from the beautifully carved wooden door. He coldly locked eyes directly with the senior patrol officer and casually promised that the incredibly massive $80,000 debt would now be violently extracted entirely in blood. He explicitly declared that Jared's personal physical safety within the brutal federal prison system would absolutely become the ultimate inescapable price for his completely unforgivable financial deceit. The terrifying men seamlessly turned around and silently marched straight back into the waiting elevator, officially abandoning the premium penthouse property entirely. As the heavy steel doors securely closed behind the retreating syndicate, Arthur Harrington calmly retrieved his encrypted smartphone from his tailored jacket pocket. He swiftly typed a highly secure, incredibly concise text message directly to my private server, formally confirming that the incredibly dangerous underground loan sharks had officially backed entirely off our personal corporate property forever. I sat completely comfortably inside my quiet suburban study, deeply satisfied knowing my incredibly treacherous son was now completely surrounded by absolutely terrifying federal predators ready to completely destroy his pathetic life completely today. Harper fiercely refused to let her glamorous digital empire completely disintegrate inside a cold federal holding cell. She meticulously coordinated her immediate release by illegally liquidating the very last hidden cash reserves buried deeply inside a heavily encrypted offshore shell company. The substantial federal bail completely drained her illicit financial safety net, leaving her absolutely desperate to rapidly generate massive capital to securely retain her incredibly expensive criminal defense lawyers. She aggressively pivoted back to her absolute strongest weapon, her highly manufactured digital influence to completely rewrite the horrifying public narrative currently destroying her life. She immediately leveraged her remaining industry contacts to furiously organize a lavish last-minute charity gala at an incredibly exclusive downtown ballroom. She shamelessly utilized her massive social media platforms to aggressively promote the extravagant event, promising a night of profound revelation and empowering solidarity for her dedicated followers. Harper ruthlessly spun her terrifying federal arrest into a dramatic story of extreme victimization, falsely claiming she was being aggressively silenced by a highly dangerous, incredibly wealthy corporate tyrant. She desperately needed this high-profile gala to successfully replenish her rapidly vanishing bank accounts and successfully manipulate public opinion before her impending federal fraud trial officially commenced. She worked absolutely tirelessly around the clock, aggressively calling every single local celebrity, media personality, and wealthy socialite she had ever professionally encountered. She maliciously leveraged every ounce of her fake charm to guarantee a completely packed, highly publicized room. She firmly believed that if she could simply control the flashing cameras and completely dominate the glamorous stage tonight, she could successfully paint herself as a brave, persecuted hero. She absolutely refused to accept her devastating defeat, aggressively preparing to wage a massive public relations war to permanently salvage her entirely fraudulent, completely manufactured, highly toxic celebrity lifestyle tonight very successfully. The highly exclusive gala was aggressively marketed across every digital channel as a profoundly vital fundraiser directly benefiting innocent victims of severe elder financial abuse. Harper meticulously constructed a completely reversed, totally fabricated narrative designed to legally absolve herself of all criminal guilt tonight. She maliciously intended to use the heavily photographed event to publicly brand me as a deeply controlling, violently senile monster who systematically ruined her young life simply out of pure, unadulterated spite. She planned to aggressively claim that her entire involvement in the forged medical conservatorship was absolutely necessary to desperately protect my wife Nadine from my supposedly ruthless, increasingly erratic corporate tyranny. The sheer audacity of her incredible lies successfully attracted an enormous, morbidly curious crowd of elite influencers and prominent local journalists. Hundreds of wealthy socialites, desperate for fresh digital content and scandalous gossip, eagerly flooded into the massive ballroom wearing their most expensive designer evening gowns. The sprawling room was beautifully decorated with thousands of pristine white roses, completely masking the incredibly ugly, fiercely criminal reality hiding directly beneath the glittering surface. Waiters smoothly circulated through the bustling crowd, politely offering expensive champagne, while professional photographers aggressively snapped thousands of bright pictures of the arriving guests. Harper brilliantly transformed her deeply shameful federal indictment into an absolutely magnificent, highly profitable social spectacle, fully expecting the wealthy attendees to blindly open their massive wallets to heavily fund her expensive legal defense. She confidently believed she had successfully outsmarted the entire justice system by viciously weaponizing fake sympathy against the incredibly naive, endlessly gullible public audience. She stood completely ready to officially deliver the absolute most deceitful, highly dramatic performance of her entire pathetic, incredibly shallow, thoroughly manipulative life right here tonight in front of every single person watching her absolutely flawless, beautiful stage performance. Harper gracefully stepped up to the crystal podium, pausing dramatically as the bright stage lights perfectly illuminated her beautifully contoured face. She gently wiped away several highly calculated, completely fake tears, using an expensive silk handkerchief expertly capturing the absolute undivided attention of the entirely silent ballroom. She leaned directly into the microphone and slowly began a heavily rehearsed, incredibly manipulative speech about bravely surviving intensely toxic family dynamics and deeply oppressive patriarchal control. Her voice trembled with absolute theatrical perfection as she painted a horrifying verbal portrait of a young, loving daughter brutally targeted by a wealthy, unhinged billionaire desperate to completely destroy her radiant spirit. She passionately pleaded with the elite audience to formally recognize the severe emotional abuse she supposedly endured while simply trying to protect her vulnerable family members from my absolute tyranny. The wealthy crowd listened incredibly sympathetically, nodding their heads in profound agreement while completely unaware of the absolute criminal truth securely hiding behind her sweet words. Several prominent digital influencers actively recorded her tragic monologue directly onto their glowing phones, eagerly broadcasting her pathetic lies directly to millions of completely gullible online viewers currently watching live tonight. Harper explicitly claimed that the massive federal charges recently filed against her were entirely fabricated by my expensive corporate lawyers to physically silence her courageous advocacy absolutely forever. She gracefully gestured toward the massive donation screens brightly illuminating the elegant walls, softly begging the extremely affluent attendees to generously contribute massive sums of immediate liquid cash to her completely fraudulent legal defense fund. The entire room was completely spellbound by her beautiful, tragic illusion, entirely ready to aggressively open their checkbooks to blindly support this incredibly vicious, highly manipulative, totally corrupt young woman right here, inside this very magnificent building, on this extremely profitable fake night. Harper was just reaching the dramatic, tearful climax of her heavily practiced performance when the massive, ornate mahogany doors at the far end of the luxurious ballroom suddenly swung violently open. The sharp, heavy sound completely shattered the sympathetic silence, filling the grand space, instantly forcing every single wealthy guest to physically turn around in absolute shock. I walked slowly into the glittering room with my beautiful wife Nadine, walking confidently directly by my side. Nadine looked absolutely breathtaking, radiating immense strength while wearing an incredibly stunning, custom-tailored emerald evening gown that practically glowed under the bright crystal chandeliers. The brutal, highly publicized trauma of her forced haircut was completely hidden beneath a flawlessly styled, incredibly expensive brunette wig that framed her healthy, vibrant face absolutely perfectly. We did not look like the weak, senile, utterly broken victims Harper had just aggressively described to this incredibly gullible audience tonight. We looked exactly like absolute corporate royalty, projecting an aura of total unshakable dominance as we marched directly down the long center aisle together. The entire crowded room instantly fell dead silent, the heavy quiet replacing the previous sympathetic murmurs with incredibly thick, suffocating tension. Harper froze completely solid behind the tall crystal podium, her fake tears instantly drying up as genuine, unadulterated terror violently flooded her widened eyes. The hundreds of flashing media cameras immediately pivoted away from the trembling girl on stage and aggressively focused directly on our magnificent, incredibly powerful arrival instead. I stared directly at my deeply terrified daughter-in-law, completely ready to permanently dismantle the absolute final piece of her pathetic, entirely fraudulent public empire right here in front of all her wealthy friends tonight as my ultimate vengeance finally reached its absolutely perfect, highly spectacular, truly glorious, undeniably complete, and devastating public conclusion. Harper froze completely solid behind the crystal podium as the sheer magnitude of our highly unexpected arrival violently crashed into her desperately fabricated reality. Her knuckles turned stark white as she gripped the edges of the heavy acrylic stand, desperately searching the massive ballroom for a viable escape route. Panic rapidly consumed her previously flawless composure, prompting her to frantically signal the venue's private security detail hovering near the grand entrance. She aggressively pointed her trembling manicured finger directly at my wife Nadine and me, loudly commanding the uniformed guards to physically remove the disruptive trespassers immediately. Two burly security officers dutifully stepped forward to execute her desperate orders, but their aggressive advance was instantly halted by Arthur Harrington smoothly stepping directly into their path. Harrington maintained a chilling, entirely unshakable professional demeanor as he calmly unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket and retrieved a thick, heavily stamped legal folio from his leather briefcase. He firmly presented an undeniable, officially certified state court order directly to the bewildered head of security, speaking in a deeply authoritative tone that echoed clearly across the silent room. Harrington explicitly explained that the incredibly expensive, highly exclusive ballroom currently hosting this fraudulent charity gala belonged to a subsidiary hospitality corporation that I completely and absolutely controlled. I possessed the undeniable, overriding executive authority to dictate every single operational protocol within this magnificent building because I literally owned the very floor Harper was currently standing upon. The head of security quickly scanned the irrefutable corporate documentation, instantly recognizing the absolute legitimacy of my supreme financial dominance. He immediately signaled his 5 men to stand down and rapidly step back, effectively leaving Harper entirely trapped and completely defenseless upon her brightly lit stage, while the wealthy audience watched her entire false empire rapidly begin to systematically implode. I confidently bypassed the entirely paralyzed crowd of wealthy socialites, leaving Nadine safely positioned near the wide entrance as I marched deliberately toward the elevated audio-visual control booth. The highly experienced professional technicians currently operating the complex light boards and massive digital sound systems instantly recognized my undeniable executive authority and immediately stepped completely aside without uttering a single word of protest. I calmly approached the primary digital console, extracting a sleek silver flash drive directly from my tailored inner jacket pocket. This tiny metallic device contained the absolute and complete entirety of Harper's deeply malicious conspiracy, meticulously compiled by my elite private investigators over the last several incredibly turbulent days. Without hesitating for even a fraction of a second, I firmly plugged the encrypted drive directly into the master projection terminal and aggressively initiated the main presentation sequence. The two incredibly massive, ultra-high-definition projection screens looming aggressively behind Harper's crystal podium instantly flickered to bright, unforgiving life. The majestic charity gala logos were violently replaced by a stark, incredibly harsh digital interface designed strictly to deliver absolute, undeniable truth directly to the deeply captivated audience. Harper wildly turned her head around her jaw, literally dropping open as the sheer scale of my technological ambush became entirely and brutally apparent. The beautiful ambient lighting was systematically killed by the control booth technicians, leaving the entire luxurious ballroom illuminated solely by the cold, highly revealing glow of the colossal digital screens. I stood silently inside the darkened booth, my hands resting calmly upon the complex control panel, completely ready to permanently execute the absolute destruction of her carefully curated public image. The absolute turning point of my silent retaliation had officially arrived, completely transforming her glamorous, highly publicized charity event into a highly inescapable, absolutely devastating digital tribunal tonight. The colossal digital screens seamlessly transitioned into a highly synchronized, devastatingly comprehensive slideshow, meticulously detailing their entire criminal enterprise. First, the massive projection boldly displayed the heavily forged power of attorney document, explicitly highlighting the brutally manufactured signature Jared had violently attempted to submit at the local bank. Beside it, the screens immediately flashed highly secure bank transaction logs, definitively showing exactly how Jared systematically siphoned massive sums of liquid cash directly from my personal corporate holding accounts to aggressively fund his severe underground gambling addiction. A collective, incredibly heavy murmur of profound shock rapidly rippled directly through the packed ballroom as the wealthy socialites stared blankly at the irrefutable numerical evidence validating his massive theft. Before the captive audience could successfully process the sheer magnitude of his financial treachery, the colossally bright screens swiftly transitioned again to expose an entirely new layer of vicious betrayal. Enormous razor-sharp screenshots of Harper's heavily encrypted text messages absolutely dominated the visual display. The private conversations explicitly showed her aggressively conspiring with her deeply corrupt medical cousin to legally force an entirely fraudulent dementia diagnosis directly upon my beloved wife Nadine. The horrific text bubbles clearly detailed their sickeningly precise plot to actively drug Nadine, forcibly seize total legal control of our vast medical decisions, and permanently drain our entire retirement portfolio absolutely dry. The affluent attendees instantly gasped in pure, unadulterated horror, physically recoiling away from the brightly lit stage where Harper remained entirely frozen in sheer terror. The sickeningly sweet, incredibly false narrative she had just tearfully delivered completely shattered into absolute dust before their very eyes. The overwhelming weight of her undeniable cruelty violently suffocated the luxurious room, brilliantly ensuring that her once glorious social reputation was completely annihilated directly in front of everyone standing right here completely tonight. The absolute final piece of damning evidence suddenly began playing loudly over the massive ballroom surround sound speakers, echoing across the completely horrified crowd. It was the highly incriminating, deeply malicious audio recording captured entirely by the secret hidden camera Harper had foolishly planted directly inside my own private kitchen. Instead of publicly broadcasting any fabricated evidence of my supposedly brutal, deeply abusive patriarchal tyranny, the crystal-clear audio actively completely betrayed her entire sickening agenda. The high-fidelity recording flawlessly captured Harper viciously whispering directly to her deeply indebted husband, aggressively ordering Jared to rapidly drain my massive retirement accounts entirely completely dry today. Her uniquely distinct, terribly venomous voice commanded him to absolutely maximize their horrific illegal gains while completely abandoning my recovering wife directly to absolute financial ruin. She heartlessly instructed him to forcibly lock Nadine inside a terrible state facility so they could freely enjoy their stolen millions without experiencing a single ounce of familial guilt. The deeply appalled, extremely affluent crowd instantly erupted into absolute, unadulterated disgust, furiously shouting their intense outrage directly at the trembling girl trapped helplessly upon the brightly illuminated stage. Wealthy socialites who had previously wiped sympathetic tears from their expensive faces now aggressively hurled vicious insults directly toward the podium, completely disgusted by her profound, unfathomable cruelty. Several prominent donors furiously demanded their massive digital contributions be immediately refunded, violently revoking every single ounce of highly valuable support she so desperately required. Harper aggressively covered her heavily made-up face with her shaking hands, violently sobbing as her absolute, incredibly spectacular public execution completely finalized itself. Her meticulously constructed, incredibly lucrative social media fantasy permanently died right here inside this majestic ballroom, entirely concluding my totally absolute, wonderfully perfect, deeply satisfying, incredibly beautiful family vengeance forever tonight, completely and totally. The immediate aftermath of the horrific audio recording echoing through the massive ballroom was absolutely chaotic as the wealthy attendees collectively recoiled in pure, unadulterated disgust. The incredibly affluent socialites who had just spent the entire evening blindly weeping for a completely fabricated victim instantly transformed into an incredibly hostile, furious mob. They rapidly surged toward the grand exit doors, desperately eager to permanently distance their pristine public reputations from this highly toxic, monumentally fraudulent event. Women in expensive designer gowns aggressively shoved past the beautifully decorated tables, loudly demanding immediate, irrevocable refunds for their massively misplaced charitable donations. The prominent local media figures and elite digital journalists currently stationed throughout the venue reacted with terrifying predatory speed. They instantly completely abandoned their sympathetic coverage and aggressively turned every single flashing camera lens directly onto Harper. They ruthlessly swarmed the brightly illuminated stage, aggressively shoving sharp microphones directly into her pale, terrified face while loudly demanding immediate explanations for the spectacular criminal conspiracy they had just witnessed. Reporters violently shouted overlapping questions, relentlessly grilling her about the forged medical documents, the illegal underground drug operations, and the deeply malicious plan to forcefully institutionalize an innocent woman. Harper desperately backed away from the blinding camera flashes, violently raising her trembling hands to shield her tear-stained face from the incredibly unforgiving media assault. Her completely manufactured, highly lucrative digital kingdom was spectacularly crumbling into absolute digital ashes right before her very eyes. She wildly looked around the massive room for any possible escape route, entirely trapped like a hunted animal cornered by the very same ruthless public attention she had so maliciously weaponized against my family. The beautiful, elegant charity gala had entirely devolved into a brutal, incredibly public, highly documented, absolute criminal execution unfolding vividly right here before us all tonight. Unable to withstand the incredibly suffocating pressure of the furious media swarm, Harper suddenly abandoned her crystal podium and sprinted blindly toward the massive service exit located directly behind the grand stage. She violently shoved her way through the heavy velvet curtains, desperately seeking the quiet anonymity of the dark alleyway to successfully execute a rapid, unseen escape. However, her absolutely pathetic attempt at avoiding total accountability abruptly ended the very second she aggressively pushed the heavy steel emergency doors completely open. A highly coordinated, heavily armed tactical team of stern federal agents specifically representing the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division immediately stepped directly into her path. The imposing lead investigator completely blocked her frantic exit, raising his secure federal badge while aggressively pushing her trembling frame straight back inside the brightly illuminated building. He loudly informed the deeply terrified influencer that hosting this massive, highly profitable public charity gala without officially filing the proper governmental disclosures legally constituted an unregistered, entirely fraudulent financial solicitation. This incredibly reckless, heavily monetized event absolutely violated the incredibly strict, totally unforgiving federal terms established explicitly during her recent bail hearing just days ago. The massive influx of completely illegal, unverified donations directly triggered an automatic federal warrant for her immediate, non-negotiable physical arrest right here tonight. The stern federal agent aggressively seized her violently shaking wrists, forcefully binding them together with thick steel handcuffs as the eager paparazzi relentlessly captured every single humiliating second of her spectacular downfall. She was formally taken directly into strict federal custody on the spot, completely losing any remaining shred of her fraudulent, glamorous lifestyle. The massive doors swung totally shut permanently, dragging her straight out of the glittering high society world and permanently plunging her directly into absolute, inescapable criminal ruin for the long, foreseeable future. I stood quietly near the towering glass doors of the grand ballroom, calmly watching the bright red and blue flashing lights of the federal police cruisers violently illuminating the dark city street outside. While the incredibly loud, deeply chaotic spectacle of Harper's highly televised arrest continued unfolding directly beyond the thick windows, I absolutely felt zero lingering sense of joyous personal victory. There was completely no sweet, deeply satisfying triumph surging fiercely within my chest tonight. Instead, a profoundly heavy, incredibly dark solemnity entirely washed over my quiet spirit. I felt exactly like an exhausted, deeply battered field surgeon forcefully cauterizing an incredibly massive, entirely fatal wound to desperately save the remaining healthy portions of my deeply fractured family. 2 incredibly long, highly painful decades ago, I had foolishly utilized the massive influx of my early corporate wealth to completely insulate my growing son from every single harsh, undeniably brutal reality the world ever offered. I deeply believed that effortlessly removing all his severe financial obstacles would automatically guarantee a perfectly happy, entirely secure existence. That incredibly massive parental miscalculation actively created the very greedy, totally entitled monster who eventually attempted to brutally destroy his own loving mother for a pathetic payout. The painful realization of my massive foundational failure heavily anchored my tired soul to the floor tonight. I slowly reached out my right arm, gently wrapping my hand securely around Nadine's trembling fingers. My beloved wife squeezed my palm incredibly tightly, silently projecting a massive, entirely unshakable wave of profound solidarity and incredibly deep mutual understanding. We stood completely united in the absolute quiet darkness of the empty hallway, silently watching the severe legal consequences finally extract the terrible, necessary, ultimate price for their profound, entirely unforgivable, malicious financial sins, exactly right here, perfectly successfully completed, together today. The crisp, unforgiving sunlight of the very next morning illuminated the incredibly bleak, highly fortified exterior of the massive federal penitentiary located directly outside the primary city limits. I methodically walked through the incredibly strict security checkpoints, calmly surrendering my personal belongings before being escorted deep into the maximum security visitation ward. I sat down heavily on the cold metal chair, staring completely blankly through the thick, impenetrable safety glass, physically dividing the sterile room. A heavy steel door violently slid open on the opposite side, and two stern corrections officers aggressively marched Jared directly toward the isolated booth. He looked absolutely horrifying, completely stripped of his previously pristine designer wardrobe and now wearing a deeply unflattering, highly restrictive orange prison jumpsuit. His pale, violently shaking face was already heavily bruised, explicitly bearing the immediate, incredibly brutal physical consequences of existing completely unprotected amongst dangerous inmates fiercely associated with his massive, unpaid underground gambling debts. Jared practically collapsed into his assigned metal chair, desperately grabbing the heavy black intercom phone with heavily trembling, deeply battered fingers. He aggressively pressed the plastic receiver directly against his ear, violently weeping as he stared into my entirely emotionless, coldly detached eyes. Through the thick glass, I could clearly see his mouth frantically moving, pathetically pleading for absolute parental salvation before his vicious creditors officially executed their incredibly terrifying, highly permanent final collection procedures directly inside the brutal prison yard. He desperately needed his incredibly powerful, infinitely wealthy father to miraculously purchase his physical safety by instantly settling the massive financial scores he had foolishly ignited. I slowly reached my steady right hand entirely forward, calmly picking up my designated receiver from the cold steel wall to officially address his desperate, utterly pathetic final plea head-on right here, perfectly and definitively, once and forever. I held the heavy black receiver against my ear and looked directly through the thick, smudged safety glass at the sobbing, broken man sitting directly opposite me. Jared frantically pressed his bruised face toward the transparent barrier, desperately waiting for the familiar, comforting words of absolute parental salvation he had always received throughout his entirely privileged life. He fully expected me to instantly deploy my massive corporate resources to completely neutralize the terrifying underground predators currently hunting him inside this brutal federal facility. Instead, I stared back at him with a steady, completely unbreakable calm that instantly chilled the frantic air between us. I kept my voice incredibly low and entirely devoid of any residual paternal affection, systematically dismantling his pathetic illusions of an impending rescue. I explicitly informed my son that unconditional financial protection and physical salvation were exclusive privileges reserved strictly for actual family members. I clearly stated that a true family fundamentally requires mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and basic human decency to properly function and survive. I coldly reminded him that he completely and permanently forfeited every single ounce of that sacred familial privilege the exact moment he cowardly stood by and eagerly allowed his deeply malicious bride to publicly humiliate his own recovering mother. He actively facilitated Nadine's horrific trauma, maliciously weaponizing her deeply personal health struggles to fraudulently generate massive social media sympathy and rapidly secure unearned digital revenue. He enthusiastically traded his own mother's absolute dignity for a pathetic, entirely temporary financial payout to selfishly cover his incredibly reckless, highly dangerous underground gambling debts. By actively choosing absolute greed over basic familial loyalty, he completely severed the foundational ties that previously bound us together. I explicitly confirmed that he was now officially dealing with the brutal consequences entirely alone without me today, right now. Maintaining absolute eye contact with the terrified prisoner sitting directly across from me, I calmly reached into the interior pocket of my tailored jacket. I slowly retrieved a heavily stamped, officially notarized legal document intricately prepared by Arthur Harrington earlier this very morning. With deliberate, incredibly measured movements, I firmly slid the thick paperwork directly through the narrow metal visitor slot positioned at the bottom of the thick safety window. Jared eagerly snatched the papers with violently trembling hands, hopelessly believing I had miraculously delivered his official federal bail release forms. Instead, his bloodshot eyes rapidly scanned the dense legal text, instantly widening in sheer, unadulterated horror as the absolutely devastating truth finally materialized before him. It was a completely finalized, irrevocably executed disinheritance decree, formally processed by the highest state courts. I coldly informed my weeping son that his specific name had been legally and permanently eradicated from my entire massive financial estate. He was entirely stripped from every single lucrative family trust fund, completely erased from all highly profitable corporate holdings, and absolutely removed from all future inheritance distributions indefinitely. The vast, incredibly wealthy logistics empire I had meticulously built from scratch over 4 grueling decades would absolutely never benefit his greedy, entirely treacherous hands again. He would receive absolutely nothing from the immense familial wealth he had so arrogantly assumed was his undeniable birthright. Every single luxurious sports car premium downtown condominium and heavily funded bank account had been aggressively legally reclaimed by my anonymous corporate entities. He was now completely financially severed from the vast protective shield that had foolishly insulated him his entire life. The incredibly thick, heavily binding legal document permanently guaranteed that he was officially a completely penniless, entirely destitute individual facing the grim reality of an impoverished future without any assistance today. Jared immediately broke down into violent, uncontrollable weeping, aggressively pressing his heavily bruised hands flat against the cold safety glass separating us. He frantically begged and wildly pleaded for a miraculous second chance, his terrified voice completely cracking under the immense weight of his impending doom. He promised he would instantly completely change his selfish ways, desperately swearing to permanently abandon his horrific underground gambling habits and absolutely devote his entire miserable life to proudly serving our family business. He wildly insisted that he genuinely and truly loved us entirely forcefully, crying that he simply made a terrible, utterly foolish mistake, fueled by sheer financial desperation and incredible external manipulation. I sat perfectly still, completely unmoved by his intensely pathetic, highly rehearsed theatrical display of extreme emotional manipulation. I spoke clearly into the heavy black receiver, sharply interrupting his frantic, incredibly tearful monologue with absolute unyielding authority. I calmly stated that this incredibly brutal, highly restricted federal penitentiary environment actually was his monumental second chance at life. This terrifying incarceration was his ultimate, entirely unshielded opportunity to finally learn exactly how to successfully survive, relying absolutely entirely upon his own individual character. For his entire incredibly privileged existence, he had foolishly utilized my massive corporate money to completely erase the severe consequences of his remarkably destructive actions. He had comfortably hidden behind my enormous financial shield, successfully masking his incredibly deep personal cowardice and absolute moral bankruptcy from the real world. Now entirely stripped of his massive trust funds and incredibly luxurious safety nets, he would finally be forcefully compelled to discover his true underlying worth as a human being. The brutal, unforgiving reality of the harsh federal prison system would systematically test his genuine inner strength entirely without my vast financial resources miraculously arriving to effortlessly save him today. Without waiting for another pathetic, entirely self-serving response from the sobbing criminal trapped behind the heavy glass, I firmly placed the black intercom receiver directly back onto its secure metal wall hook. The sharp, incredibly definitive click of the disconnected plastic phone instantly severed the final remaining audio link between my peaceful future and his completely disastrous reality. I smoothly turned my back on my weeping biological son, aggressively refusing to offer him a single comforting final backward glance as I calmly began my deliberate, highly measured walk directly toward the heavily guarded exit. Behind my tailored shoulders, the massive, incredibly thick steel mechanical doors violently slid completely shut with a truly deafening, heavily reverberating metallic crash. That incredibly loud, brutally final sound officially completely severed the deeply toxic, incredibly draining emotional bond that had aggressively poisoned my loving family for so many exhausting, extremely stressful consecutive decades. The incredibly severe, deeply meticulous corporate retaliation I had so flawlessly executed was now definitively and entirely concluded right here, today. The heavy, suffocating burden of constantly protecting a completely ungrateful, fiercely manipulative predator was finally entirely lifted from my incredibly weary shoulders. I smoothly navigated the final concrete security checkpoints, completely ignoring the sterile, entirely bleak institutional environment surrounding my rapid departure. I confidently pushed the heavy exterior glass doors entirely open, decisively, stepping directly out into the beautifully crisp, entirely untainted, wonderfully bright morning air. I closed my tired eyes for a brief, incredibly peaceful second, deeply inhaling the pure, utterly refreshing scent of absolute, undeniable personal freedom. Nadine was waiting safely at home, completely radiant and entirely healed from the horrific trauma inflicted upon her. Our beautiful, highly unshakable, deeply loving shared lives could finally officially resume together, entirely, completely, securely, and successfully, absolutely, wonderfully, flawlessly, forever starting today. Exactly 6 months have completely evaporated since that highly definitive, utterly ruthless final morning inside the cold concrete walls of the severe federal penitentiary. The deafening, incredibly destructive storm that brutally threatened to entirely consume our peaceful lives had finally definitively passed, absolutely forever. I sat incredibly comfortably outside on the pristine wooden deck of our beautifully quiet, heavily secured suburban home, deeply absorbing the absolute tranquility of this magnificent morning. The brutally shattered glass from the terrible night of my son's violent physical intrusion had been flawlessly replaced by heavily reinforced, highly advanced ballistic-grade security windows. Every single physical trace of their deeply pathetic, utterly malicious domestic invasion was permanently erased from our beautiful shared reality. The entire sprawling property now felt absolutely undeniably safe, entirely impenetrable, and wonderfully exclusively our own secure domain. The thick, heavily fortified perimeter completely physically insulated us from the incredibly greedy, totally superficial, highly toxic external world we had aggressively severed from our daily existence. I quietly breathed in the incredibly fresh, perfectly crisp autumn breeze, profoundly appreciating the absolute total silence, seamlessly filling the massive backyard garden completely beautifully today. The morning sun gently warmed the sturdy wooden deck boards. We no longer actively lived in constant, deeply exhausting fear of sudden aggressive ambushes or highly manipulative, deeply deceitful surprise visits. The incredibly heavy, entirely suffocating burden of silently enduring their absolute, complete, total disrespect was completely, permanently lifted from my tired shoulders, absolutely forever. The deep, extremely beautiful quiet, enveloping the entire massive suburban estate, actively represented the absolute ultimate victory of our profound familial defense. Our heavily protected personal sanctuary was absolutely, completely, flawlessly, physically restored, officially guaranteeing our long remaining years together would incredibly wonderfully remain, perfectly, totally undisturbed, completely, absolutely, securely, safely, peacefully today, forever, wonderfully, always. The serene morning silence was gently broken when Arthur Harrington arrived carrying his sleek black briefcase containing the absolute final batch of heavily stamped legal paperwork. He confidently walked onto the wooden porch, officially delivering the incredibly satisfying ultimate resolution, confirming our permanent absolute triumph today. Harrington meticulously laid out the certified court documents definitively proving that Harper was currently serving significant time inside a highly secure federal prison, strictly for committing massive consecutive counts of severe wire fraud. Her entirely fabricated digital empire was completely dismantled, perfectly permanently replacing her incredibly glamorous lifestyle with harsh institutional reality. Jared absolutely cowardly avoided a massive public trial, entirely desperately taking a deeply punitive federal plea deal specifically for his incredibly extensive, highly documented underground financial crimes. His desperate, highly pathetic final surrender officially guaranteed he would spend years locked completely away from any decent society without possessing a single cent of our family wealth. Furthermore, the massive stack of heavily audited financial records flawlessly confirmed that the staggering amount of money previously stolen directly through their incredibly malicious fake GoFundMe campaign had been successfully entirely recovered. Every single incredibly generous, deeply misguided charitable donation was fully, completely refunded directly back to the original unsuspecting donors by my incredibly aggressive accounting team. The absolute entirety of their deeply toxic, profoundly malicious criminal conspiracy was completely systematically neutralized, beautifully dismantled, and permanently, entirely, legally destroyed. Right here, absolutely today. Harrington calmly handed me a pristine silver pen, politely asking me to firmly execute the absolute final binding signature to permanently conclude this incredibly disastrous, heavily publicized chapter completely forever. I confidently signed my bold name directly onto the thick premium paper, officially finalizing their absolute terrible destruction and successfully perfectly concluding my incredibly fierce protective vengeance, beautifully, successfully, perfectly, tonight, forever, absolutely, today. After definitively concluding the incredibly satisfying federal prosecution paperwork, Harrington deliberately opened his sleek black leather briefcase a second highly important time. He carefully extracted one beautifully constructed, heavily bound, completely pristine final legal dossier directly onto my polished outdoor patio table. This massive, entirely undeniable corporate instrument officially directed the complete transfer of my vast, heavily protected, hidden international personal wealth. I calmly grasped the expensive silver pen again, purposefully executing the profound, ultimate corporate signature today. With that highly specific, entirely unshakable physical motion, my immense offshore financial holdings were permanently legally transformed. Every single exceptionally profitable dollar was officially routed directly into a newly established, entirely irrevocable philanthropic trust. This massively funded organizational masterpiece was beautifully dedicated entirely to comprehensively supporting extremely vulnerable lower-income women. Specifically, the uniquely designed charitable fund completely provided massively comprehensive financial coverage for incredible women currently undergoing brutal, highly expensive cancer treatments. I specifically mandated that absolutely every single medical bill, expensive prescription cost, and vital transportation fee would be completely eliminated for these remarkably brave, severely struggling patients fighting for their precious lives today. The incredible philanthropic entity would permanently replace the exact horrific financial terror Nadine had tragically experienced with absolute unshakable monetary security, generously protecting thousands of truly deserving families facing similarly devastating health crises. The massive corporate trust was deeply, proudly, affectionately, and eternally named directly after Nadine herself, forever honoring her incredibly stunning resilience and absolute unmatched bravery in the face of sheer, unimaginable adversity. It was the absolute ultimate triumph of genuine love over toxic greed, beautifully weaponizing my corporate dominance to miraculously heal broken lives, rather than foolishly subsidizing ungrateful, deceitful predators completely, effortlessly, wonderfully, permanently, absolutely, truly, flawlessly, and completely successfully, exactly, wonderfully, entirely, perfectly, peacefully, wonderfully, totally, forever, right here, completely, absolutely, today. As Harrington respectfully departed the quiet property with the fully executed legal documents, the sliding glass patio door smoothly opened completely behind me. Nadine stepped gracefully out onto the sunlit wooden porch, comfortably holding two steaming ceramic mugs of freshly brewed morning coffee securely in her hands. She was proudly, incredibly, absolutely, completely, entirely, wonderfully no longer wearing that deeply suffocating, highly restrictive synthetic brunette wig that had previously forcibly concealed her beautiful, natural identity. Her gorgeous, natural hair had incredibly, wonderfully, healthily grown back into a stunning, elegantly tight silver crop that framed her perfectly glowing, wonderfully vibrant, completely, incredibly, deeply healthy face perfectly beautifully. She looked absolutely, incredibly, overwhelmingly, breathtakingly alive, entirely, totally free from the incredibly massive, completely devastating, horrific physical exhaustion and deeply terrible emotional manipulation she had previously unfairly, quietly, completely, helplessly, unfortunately endured. She smiled incredibly warmly, gently, handing me the wonderfully hot ceramic coffee mug as she calmly sat directly closely beside me on the perfectly comfortable wooden patio bench. We completely peacefully sat closely, incredibly tightly, securely, completely intimately, firmly, completely, wonderfully, safely, beautifully together in the incredibly bright, beautifully warm, perfectly comforting autumn morning sun, wonderfully, completely sharing an incredibly deep, wonderfully profound, totally unbreakable, comfortable, absolute, complete, total, perfect, wonderful, quiet silence. The incredibly vicious, exceptionally manipulative, Utterly ruthless parasitic predators had been successfully, permanently, meticulously, completely removed, entirely, completely from our beautifully secure daily existence. Absolutely, perfectly, flawlessly, successfully, forever, completely, entirely today. The incredibly vital, ultimately essential protective boundary of genuine, profound, unconditional mutual respect had been actively, fully, permanently cemented, absolutely, flawlessly, securely, strongly, totally, entirely, deeply, wonderfully, safely, flawlessly, perfectly today, forever. We were finally, wonderfully, happily, joyfully, forever, wholly, truly, deeply, contentedly, absolutely, unconditionally, totally, entirely, completely at perfect peace today, forever, right now. Share your thoughts on setting strict boundaries with toxic family members in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe for more empowering stories.